Okay, I got the little red light that says that I am live. Good evening, everybody. This is Jacob Daniel with the Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy podcast. Waiting on our guest for tonight. Our guest is Hodey Johns of the We Are Libertarian network. He is the host of the show Enemy of My Enemy, which I occasionally guest show on. But I've known Hodey before he started that show. We've been friends for a while over Facebook. Both Christians and libertarians, anarchists. And so I'm looking forward to an exciting conversation with him tonight, which I will add him onto the stream as soon as he joins us. In the meantime, I'll plug the website again. The website is up and running. Still a couple glitches that we are working out and some fine tuning, but Daniel318.com is up and running. The podcasts are there. There's also, you can leave comments. You can, if you want to, I have things set up now that if you want to donate to the show, you can do so. I'm only going to accept donations up until the point that it would cover the cost of running the show. And after that, if I started making more than that, I would be looking for some kind of either, I'm not sure. I've toiled with either picking one charity and sticking with it for a while, or maybe every month kind of picking a new charity and donating monthly proceeds in the excess of what I make to cover costs towards that charity. But that's down the road. You can also, if you are a listener of the show and you want to partake in it, like if you want to, there's an option where you can send like a voice question, like record a question or a comment to be read live on the air. And there's also, if you wanted to join the show and actually like be on here for like a conversation, there's a form that you can fill out and get on the show that way as well. Let's see. I see Caleb is in the my friend Caleb of the Libertarians Network. I mean, of the Catholic Libertarian. God, I can't think straight tonight. Is already in the comments shit posting me, so that's good. See, he said, just gave you a written intro. You're welcome. He said, looking at the world through the lens of faith and freedom. That's a good title. I will definitely tax that as the libertarian vernacular goes. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to. Oh crap! I sent the link to the wrong. I sent the link to the wrong person. That's why he hasn't joined yet. I had multiple messenger windows up and sent it to somebody else who I'm going to be having on next month. But yeah, actually, it's a good way to segue to announcing it. At the end of this month, I believe it is on my calendar for the 28th. I'm getting Gregory Baus back on. Baus is or Boss. Sorry, no, is it Baus? I don't remember. I'll ask him again when he's back on. I think it's Baus. But yeah, Greg, who I had a great conversation with early on in the show. He is the one where the conversation I had with him was on Romans 13 and the idea of stateless civil governance. So my views on reconciling Christian anarchism and libertarian philosophy with the Bible stem a lot from that conversation. And I'm going to be having him back on the show at the end of the month, and we're going to dive a little bit more into the ideas of sphere sovereignty, which is an idea that Abraham Kuyper, a Dutch reformer, kind of one of the founders of like the neo-Calvinist movement, came up with. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more and kind of explain more of the reformed positions on the Christian doctrines of civil governance and how that pertains to libertarian philosophy. So definitely check that out. That'll be a great conversation. All right. Hodey is in the lobby, and I'm going to add him now.
Do it,
my friend. How you doing?
Doing good. How you doing, Jacob?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Yeah, I sent the link. I don't know if you heard. I sent the link to the wrong person, so I was just sitting around waiting, just like, okay, I'm gonna go live, wait for him, okay, and then finally I checked and like, I'm the dummy. I sent it to the wrong guy.
There's a lot of Hodeys out there. It's a perfectly acceptable mistake.
No, it was just I had like multiple messenger windows open and just copied and pasted the join link to the wrong wrong person. So, but that's all right. I'm glad you're here now. So, I already kind of introduced you, but I'll let you introduce yourself as well. Um, Maybe just give your background a little bit, and like 5 minutes, talk about how you came to libertarianism and what it is you do. Like, because you have actually, I wanted to what you do for a living, is your career, because that's interesting, and then also what you do in the libertarian grifting sphere. I mean, podcasting sphere.
Good stuff. Well, I am Hodey Johns. I am really nothing too special. I did major in theology, and so I do have a love of kind of all. I did general studies theology. I love all. I just love studying religion in general. I find there's some great principles there. I'm part of the We Are Libertarians network. The way I came to be a libertarian, I grew up Republican, and I can't ever say I was definitely like a pro-war, what you would call like a neocon type of Republican. I was never sold on a lot of the bigotry that's within the Republican Party. And when I was part of the Tea Party, and I know looking back now it was so dumb, but I really thought it was all going to change. Like we had so many people that were like, "Hey, finally, let's let this gay marriage thing go. Let's let this like anti-immigrant thing go. Let's just be done with it. Let's cut loose." And I got to tell you, and I worked for the Republicans, and I really thought that was the future. And when that got squashed, and actually got squashed by the RNC, it's funny that the DNC kind of had the more public sabotage of the candidates they didn't like, of the Democratic candidates. But the RNC, I mean, they challenged whenever we had a candidate that was kind of a social liberal, fiscal actual conservative. I mean, that was a big thing too, is that we were like actually talking about shrinking budgets. And whenever we put somebody up, the RNC itself would contest our signatures. I mean, we're used to fighting against the Democrats in courts, and we're used to fight, when we were used to fighting even against libertarians in the courts, but fighting against our own people, it's just too much. They could direct the flow of money. They had all the political action committees. We had no hope. And so their bigoted, terrible, uh, anti actual conservative candidates would end up winning. And I just said, you know what, there is no way forward here. I really thought that this was going to be it. That did not work out. So I ended up becoming a libertarian. I was like, you know what, this looks like a live and let live kind of movement here. And that's how I found my way here. I have loved it here. I guess, and probably I should have started this. Maybe what you might know me most for is my speech and debate work. That's what got me through high school, through college, paid for my college. We won 3 national championships. And so I have a love of debate. But a lot of that debate is what brought me to liberty, because there's good reasons for to make any decision on any policy. And it made me realize that there's one universal law isn't really great. And this kind of brought me into anarchy, right? Because you have one law and you have to adhere to that single standard, as opposed to using your conscience to say like, well, in this way, I could see it being used, or in this way, it wouldn't make any sense, as opposed to saying, no, it has to make sense all the time for all people. And it allows for no nuance at all. The law does not permit you a difference of opinion. And so, or a different way to run your life. And to accept that all people are different, why then should they function under the same law? And so I joined the liberty movement. I probably should have joined the anarchist movement a lot earlier. As you know, I kind of had a conversation with Larkin Rose about that. And I said, well, the most important things that the libertarians have been stressing for centuries, and what I think is most important, is that government is transparent, accountable, and voluntary. And he was like, well, that's anarchy. Like, that's not,
Right.
if it's a voluntary government, like, it's not. And I am big, and I still kind of defend my position on the issue, only in the sense I've embraced anarchy now, but I defended my anarchist position only because if you read anything earlier than 20, 30, 40 years ago, any amount of believing in any hierarchy, including intellectual, I mean, just differences of not just income, differences, but like, if there's an intellectual or a social, hierarchy, then it's not anarchy, right? And so, like, for me, I'm just like, well, I certainly believe that there's certain actions that you could take that society should view as not good, right? So, like, there's a social cost that you should pay. I just think those are necessary things. I don't love the idea of hierarchy. I just think that it's a good way of saying, like, hey, let's incentivize you to do good things. I don't believe in zero-sum economics, so I don't think that the people the lowest on the totem pole have to suffer. That's not my goal. My goal is for you to, do what you want to do to most succeed. So I became kind of an anarchist through that. I've embraced the role. I really love the idea that law is just insufficient. It really fits well with my Christianity. And it's funny that I did not see it earlier, because only since have I kind of run into people like Tolstoy and the kind of those philosophers that are like, man, it is difficult for you to be a Christian and believe in the state.
Yeah.
And so I came to each of these conclusions separately. I came to libertarianism and anarchy separately than I did from Christianity. But now that they're together, it's a perfect fit. And I'm really, other than that, met you, have a podcast called Enemy of My Enemy. It's a great show, again, on the We Are Libertarians network. We talk and we debate all kinds of different issues. We have left, right, and center libertarians there. I absolutely love the entire gamut. I love most libertarians, and I like focusing on what I love, and kind of just, there are people who are good at dealing with what they hate and can kind of spend the whole day on that realm, and that's not something that goes well with my soul. So I kind of stick to conversations with people that I enjoy and that I respect.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's, I remember when I first became a libertarian, I went through kind of like the Austrian economics route. And, it's funny, when you were talking about, you reminded me of my days back when I was a Bernie bro, and you're talking about the Democrats sabotaging their candidates. Cause I know all about that. I kind of watched that happen before my eyes. And unfortunately, that wasn't enough of a disillusionment to politics. I just kind of, it was like, all right, we gotta ward off Trump because he's the great evil. And then, voted for Hillary reluctantly. Then I saw, okay, well, Trump's still bad, but he's not quite as evil and not quite what the left is saying he is. And there's, people talking about Trump in these conservative circles that are pushing economics, that are challenging my views. And then I just happened to find Tom Woods, Dave Smith, and a lot of people who were pushing me towards Mises and Rothbard. And then that was game over at that point. But then I had to go, okay, well, wait a second. All right, I've made this huge political transition. Does it connect to the Bible at all? And then I've kind of nestled into, obviously with this podcast, I've nestled into a really comfortable position of thinking they're really a match made in heaven. I mean, no pun intended there. Right?
Nice. That's good.
Tolstoy's book being "The Kingdom of Heaven is within you," and I just think that's such a perfect, taking the teachings of Christ to their consistent conclusions.
Yep.
Loving your neighbor. If you love your neighbor, and especially if you love your enemy, I don't think you can really be for any type of statism, or at least any type of, I know, like back when you were having your conversation with Larkin, it's like there's this weird gray area between anarchy and minarchy, where like minarchists push what they call like voluntary governance, which is like the anarchists go, well, that's just anarchy, and the minarchists go, well, no, that's still and it gets into like this semantics thing,
right?
But if you get the seal of approval from Larkin Rose, I don't think anyone's going to argue with him.
Nobody will argue my anarchist chops after that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
it's one of those that it's just, I understand both sides of the issue so well. I think having lived it all, having seen it all, I actively seek for that challenge. You had Molyneux talk about on the last episode how kind of the immune system works, how it's good to run into other points of view, and how we should seek out those challenges. People that have legitimate disagreements with us. I know this is something you do particularly well, but to just say like, hey, like you see,
I'm glad you think so.
Please tell me how you see it. Right.
Sometimes I'm not sure how well I do it, because it's
you've got an opinion, right? Like, and the thing is that's always going to happen. Like, even when I was doing speech and debate, and I was able to argue both sides, I still had an opinion. This isn't like I just like don't believe in anything anymore, right? Like I still have an opinion on some of these things that I argue. If we have a capitalism versus socialism, the debate, the nice part about being an adult is I get to choose which side I'm on. When I'm in college, I'm just they give me the sickle and hammer and they say, go make this look good, and I'm like, all right, I hope they haven't read their history books, but yeah, let's do this.
So So I don't know too much about I did high school speech and debate, but I didn't go to
Mm,
college. Is it still like I know in high school it was like Lincoln Douglas, and then there was parliamentary and
yep,
public forum. Which one did you
forensics.
do? Like Lincoln Douglas style, or was it something different?
No, so I did the general debate circuit, and with this and me personally, and there are it's team, right? So it's a whole team
Okay.
coming together, and then you've got the speeches, and I did policy analysis, so that was
Okay.
mine, and so they have people doing policy analysis, and
Yep.
those guys debate against each other, and that was kind of what I was responsible for. Of course, I wouldn't have done it if we didn't have a whole team put together.
Yeah.
We each get these segments. You get so little time. I'm sure, as people notice with my stuttering, I'm nowhere as good as I used to be. That's
I
just
know it's
part of
so.
aging, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
that's okay. I'm actually a much better writer than I am even a speaker. And I've published some uh, articles and various libertarian journals and that kind of thing. But whatever people feel like publishing. If nobody feels like publishing it, you just see it on Facebook and Twitter, right?
I,
So I'm like,
I've found myself since I've gotten into the podcast game having to go back and like practice those like dumb verbal games that you would do for warm ups, like the like we're like we always do, like you would go ba 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 ka ka ka, like go through the whole alphabet and
me,
just
my mama,
practice a
moo.
nut.
Yep.
Yeah, and then there was all these different sayings and songs you would do, but
Yep.
like I used to be like because I practiced it all the time. I
Yep.
used to be such an eloquent, fluent speaker. I prided myself on being able to think on my feet and speak without using a lot of ums and likes. And then I started podcasting, and it's like I haven't flexed those muscles in 10 years, and was a lot more rusty than I care to admit when I started getting back into it. But it's slowly
People
getting
like
back
you
there.
worry about being so polished, and then you listen to a guy like the most famous political commentator probably of all time in Rush Limbaugh, who's just a constantly like
Even
and it's like he doesn't
yeah,
even care. So you're like, well, on one hand, I want this to be perfect and be recognized as a professional, and I want to present myself as somebody who knows what they're doing. On the other hand, the most famous speaker on this is like kind of a bumbling. He plays himself as a buffoon. So why am I putting so much work into doing this? Maybe I should just say what I feel like saying and not worry about the ums and
yeah,
ands
that's
and
true. And even
yeah.
Dave Smith is not, like he's another popular libertarian podcaster, and he's pretty heavy on the likes and the ums. And yeah, I think the content matters a bit more than than the polish. But I don't know. There's something about being able to go on those, like, say what you want about, like, I know Molyneux is very controversial, and we don't, we can go into that my conversation with him if you want. But one of the things that I think, like, even the worst critic of him would have to give him is that because of his, like, he has like a theater background, so
Oh
he can
yeah.
go on these long monologues and he just doesn't stop, and he's so like energetic and enthused the whole time. And even though like I'm the host of the show, I'm just like, all right, I'm trying to like butt in and steer this thing, and it's just like I can't get a word in because he's just, and that's the beauty of if your speechcraft is really up to snuff, is that you can really control the flow of conversation. So that was something that was challenging, when you're trying to host a show and you have a guest that won't won't let up.
Well, there's nobody to moderate, right? You're
Yeah,
interviewing somebody, so really, if you just let him go, it's not like you have to interrupt him to get the other person some time in. It's just
true.
you and I are probably better at having normal dialogues like humans, but sometimes people need some monologues. I imagine Stefan is somebody that I mean, wildly popular 20 years ago, but I mean, if you haven't been on the scene for long, you probably haven't heard of him because he's banned from the scene.
Right.
So I mean,
Yeah.
he's a tough one to get a hold of. So yeah, yeah.
Well, and it's like, you were talking about how I navigate these spaces, and Molyneux is probably the most, not probably, I think the most controversial person I've had on my show. And, uh, my willingness to engage in conversations with people and explore territories, even if they're unpopular or they're controversial. I think part of that comes from my speech and debate background, because like we were always just encouraged to, you have to prepare both sides of, I don't think most people know this, when you go into a tournament, every round, you don't know what side you're arguing. Like you have to be prepared to argue both the pro and the con. And that can change round to round. So what I mean? It's like you have to be and you know the subjects ahead of time, so you have time to prepare, and you have to prepare like a really solid pro case and a really solid con case. And that
Yep.
it's a really good intellectual exercise to get you start like being able to uh consider alternative points of view. And like you said, you can still have an opinion, but you start to learn the ability to uh, like be able to make the opposing argument and steelman it, even if it's not the position that you necessarily agree with. And I think it
Yes.
helps a lot to learn to it helps you with listening to people. And ultimately, the goal is we've taken these skills, and I hope that you and I, can use these skills to be persuasive. And part of
Yeah.
the art of persuasion is first listening to the other side and then being able to steelman their position. Because if someone doesn't feel like you can hear what their position is and then repeat it back to them and like in your own words articulately, and it represents their views well, then they're not going to accept your critiques as well. And so I think that's a lot of like and that's what I was this is the stuff I was thinking about when I had Molyneux on, was like, I wanted to spend, and I spent like the first 40 minutes kind of like just easy, like softballs. Here's all the stuff we agree on. Then I tried to steer the conversation towards some areas where we disagreed. And I always tried to frame my challenges to him with like wrapping them in the like, hey, here's affirming where we agree. But then from this agreement, here's where we diverge and I'm not understanding where you're going. And so I'd ask him to
Sure.
explain it and then push back. I don't know if did you watch the whole episode?
Yeah.
Of all?
Yep.
I was curious I thought he kind of was a little bit dodgy with some of the stuff I pushed at him. And I couldn't tell if he just didn't understand what I was doing or if he was being dodgy, but I felt like, he, especially when I tried to connect, being against closed borders to being against COVID passports. Like, to me, I thought that was an effective argument, but I kind of feel like he didn't deal with it.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, he just kind of he reframed it his own way, right?
Yeah.
He's just saying like letting these people in would grow the state. That's a fact. He didn't want to deal with the frame of like the COVID passport example. I actually really enjoyed that Molyneux episode, by the way. And I think there's an important lesson to take from it for anybody who's listening to me who knows me. I pretty much stand for like loving I'm all about libertarian culture. I know we're going to talk about that here. I am big on like love, compassion, healing, that kind of thing. So me and Molyneux just kind of are naturally going to butt heads in most circles. Like people that like me will probably, not like him, even though I don't think I publicly said anything about Molyneux. When I came to the movement, he was a non-factor. So like, I'm not sure if I've ever uttered his name. You know what I mean? Like outside of this podcast or like talking about your show with him on it.
Right.
And not to say that's like he's irrelevant, he's unimportant. No, I mean I've read a couple of his books, like and I've heard a few clips of his radio show. I won't lie, I'm not like a Molyneux expert, and I wouldn't pretend to be. I don't want to speak for him, but I think it's important. Like here's kind of what I want to carry from it is, if you listen to what he had to say about religion like 20, 25 years ago, 15 years ago, and then listen to what he had to say about Christianity on your podcast, look at how the man has changed. I mean, this is somebody, you even mention Christianity and laughs in your dumb face, has a lot of names for, you know what I mean? You're just like, oh my gosh, like this guy's so
he used to be
hostile.
incredibly hostile towards Christians.
Correct.
I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
And was very obviously he still believes what he believes, but is very engaged. The way he reiterated Christian theology, I didn't have any even asterisks to add to what he said about when he was saying it that way. And I think that's an important lesson. And did it take over a decade for him to get there? Yeah, probably. But this is the long game, right? Like we're not overthrowing the state tomorrow. So, we play the long game. We talk with people and we say like, I'm just planting some seeds. Eventually those seeds are going to grow. I mean, it's just, especially with people who are thinkers. I was really impressed with his ability to think it out. And to be able to iterate a lot of these doctrines from the Christian perspective of how we view the state. Now, I just wanted to get credit to him. I'm glad at least he found some ability to redeem himself that way. It's very easy to I look at a guy like Richard Dawkins, who kind of was doing the same thing, who's just, I mean, he's a jerk, right? Like, and he's eugenicist jerk, and I'm just like, I could dunk all over him all day, but there's a chance that in 20 years, even if he doesn't like become a Christian, at least he can say like, I was a jerk for saying that they believed in hobgoblins or something, and say like, okay, there's probably a way that I can get through to him here. as far as like the areas of disagreement when you're talking about with the dodgy stuff, I mean, there's individualism is big for me as a libertarian because I love individuals, right? Like I think each person should have as much freedom as possible within the grounds of the NAP, right? We don't hurt people, we don't take their stuff under any circumstances, right? And this is kind of what separates me. I know a lot of I find that here's the thing with like a lot of left libertarians, they look at the NAP and they're just like, well, there are times to violate it. And I'm like, no. And then you get like too far on the right and they're just like, this is the like I anything is okay as long as it's not hurting people who are taking their stuff. And it's like, well, there's still bad ideas that you can do, like they were consensually bad ideas, right? Like and stupid things that you can do, and we need to be able to talk about those. And I find myself in the middle of those two. And again, those are far positions. Like those are kind of extreme. And I find myself in this position where it's like the reason I'm a libertarian is because I love individuals. I want people to have as much freedom as possible, as many rights as possible, and again, people hear that and like I think if you're from the right, you hear as many rights as possible, and you're like, this guy wants government healthcare. This guy, well, calm down. There's ways to like as Larry Sharp would say, there's ways to get universal health care without the government doing it. Or there's ways to at least try, right? Like, even if you think that there's no possible way it will ever happen and there's no culture that would ever value, medicine that much or education that much to educate everybody, I disagree, but we can at least be allies in the meantime, but at least that, like, for me, that's why I love it, because I love bringing those things to individuals and these cultures and these societies of what could be, to say, like, I do think, like, I would love to be a part of a society where we take care of each other, where we love each other. I'm certainly not a commune guy, but like just certain basis. I mean, this is what insurance is supposed to be, right? We all pay in, and if you actually need to take something out, you take something out. And if you don't want to be part of insurance, not part of insurance, no big deal. So where it got tricky, where Molyneux gets tricky with me is because I love individualism. He gets sucked into collectivism, in the sense that saying like immigrants generally, like 51%, I believe is or 51 to 58% of legal immigrants tend to be on welfare or on welfare, and it's like 63% of illegal immigrants are on some kind of welfare, but it's only 43% of native born citizens that are on welfare. And so therefore, like, the state grows when they're not on it. Well, first of all, that's not how non-discretionary spending works. If I'm just to get purely economic with it, the pie doesn't grow when more people are on welfare. You just slice the pie into thinner slices. This is why guys like Bernie Sanders have said they're not going to abolish ICE, because this is something that it's like, we need to heavily regulate borders. This is why Hayek, right, left his socialism, because he's like, well, for us to do this, I have to heavily regulate my borders. I'm not going to do that because that's unethical, so I'm not going to do it. Any Scandinavian country where they talk about these great robust systems, will take a look at their borders, right? Like, this is it. The one is fatal to the other. So the idea
I tried to push him on this. I was like, because like, to me, it was like, you're worried about the Democrats letting the immigrants flood in. Really, the Democrats are just as much as border hawks as the right are. It's not totally closed, but it's not open by any means. It's this weird, it's very inconsistent even. And our immigration system is so stupid. I mean, it's complicated in ways it shouldn't be. It's easy to exploit, but also easy to get caught and then locked in a cage. I mean, there's so many problems with it. But yeah,
intentionally stupid. I mean, here's the problem: is these people, we give too many people a pass because we think they're unintelligent. These are not unintelligent people running things. They simply have this mindset of how they want the world to work. Like, Barack Obama is not an idiot. That's a dumb argument to make against him. If he does something that appears idiotic, he's got an agenda. He's smart. He's educated, right? So when somebody has put together something as evil as our borders, where we have, child molesters there, they get reported and we move them to a different part of the border, right, to monitor the border. That's not one of those like, oh, I guess I'm dumb. No, that's an evil thing to do, right? Like, what you're doing. The point is the terror. The point is the terror and keeping them there. When Joe Biden creates a facility that gets, worse than the current conditions, and the current conditions are already bad, and his solution is to ban more press coverage from those facilities, he is part of that problem, right? You no longer get to be like, well, I want open borders, and that's why I'm so big on Joe Biden.
And I couldn't have guessed that. I've always thought that Democrats would be still border hawks, but they would at least like they would like lighten it up a little bit. But it really feels like Biden's almost like intensified it, if anything. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems worse. And I think part of that is the rhetoric for years was Trump was the big bad border guy,
Hmm.
and so Trump's
Sure.
gone, and now people I think are like, oh well, it's safe to try to go across again. Things should be better. But when you're enforcing the same policy and the rate increases, and then
Yep.
you are censoring press coverage and all that, it's like it was hard to imagine the situation getting worse, but somehow it has, and yet it's still a struggle to get people to pay attention to it. And then it's whether it's the left and trying to have them hold their leaders accountable, or the right to get them to just have some empathy. And it's like, and I've never heard Molyneux have any empathy for those people. Maybe he has, and I just haven't heard it. Even someone like Dave Smith, who I disagree with, he's not for opening the borders. I am.
Right.
But he even says, well, even though I don't want total open borders right now, I don't want kids locked in cages, and the stuff going on at the border is horrific,
Yeah.
and it's heartbreaking. So I can at least respect his position, because he's like, well, I don't support the authoritarianism. I would rather there be a more humane way of enforcing the border. My thing is just like, you're kind of trusting, like you're the same people that have for the last 20 years screwed up Afghanistan. You're going to trust them to humanely, regulate a border? Like, I don't really
So,
think so.
so right. So the argument is that these people vote for more government, right? Which is what, like, if we have to keep them out. Let me take economics out of it just real quick. They vote for more government, so we're going to have the government keep those people who vote for more government out. I don't think so. I mean, actively, the people that they let in tend to be the very people that would vote for them. I mean, this is just, look, come on now. Let's not be silly. When you give the government in charge, and let's not give the government any credit here. I find that a lot of the closed border position tends to give the government way too much credit. I'm
Yeah.
going hard on the borders here, and that's simply because Molyneux addressed it, and I know that it was kind of he made it seem so factual, which is why I'm talking about it. You can be a closed border like libertarian. Not all libertarians are anarchists. If that's your form of government that we need, or if you just think like, hey, we need that in the meantime until we get rid of the welfare state. I can go over the economics of why you're incorrect. Please read Hayek.
I can,
and it is a disagreement, but I accept that you're a libertarian, so I don't want to put off anybody who's just like, oh gosh, another open border.
Yeah, I know. I would hope that most minarchists could concede that maybe it should be at least something that's a bit more decentralized. Maybe the states have more control over their borders, and we're not too overly controlling the national border. I mean, I'd like to think it's possible to decentralize and deregulate a bit to make things better. And I'm not an all or nothing anarchist. Like, I'm okay with incrementalism, but there's some things that I feel like incrementalism can kind of work towards. And, we've seen, strides in like the war on drugs. We've started to see some of that with police accountability.
Sure.
It's not like mountains, it's molehills, but it's something.
Yeah.
But with something like the borders, it's just it's hard to see them enforcing that in a humanitarian way. I'd love to see it if it's possible.
Sure.
But yeah, I'm very skeptical. God, I can't talk tonight. Very skeptical of that being able to be actuated into fruition. At the same time, though, I'm just as even though I'm like theoretically for open borders, I almost feel like it's impossible. And this was the part where I could agree with Molyneux. I feel like getting the state to actually have a total open borders policy is almost like that's a just unattainable goal in the current state that we have now, the current structure. Like, the incentives are just not there.
It would be fatal to the welfare state immediately, right? Like, it just, because what would happen is we'd have a lot. And if you think there's an above average amount of immigrants on welfare now, well, the thing is we're trying to only let the ones in that are on less welfare, that are less likely to use our welfare, right? If we open the borders up, let's not make any jabs here. The people that are in the most need of help are going to come over. And what's going to happen is that pie, where everybody gets a smaller and smaller slice, the more people that are draining it and the less that is put into it, they're good. Eventually, welfare is just going to be so negligible. Here's your $20 check for monthly, and people are just going to be like, this is a goofball idea, right? Like it, and so ultimately, it's fatal to the welfare state. This was the Mises and Hayek conversation.
Yeah.
And it can't. It just doesn't coexist. It is lethal to the welfare state.
It
And so,
is, but that's why I think they'll never do it. Now, like
right,
if
exactly.
theoretically you
Yeah,
give me
no
that
way.
magic, and I've always told people you should push for open borders
Yeah.
because, like, if you got it, I agree. I think that, like,
Oh
because
yeah.
I always think the idea like end the welfare state, then open the border. Like, no, you have it backwards. If you open the borders, I think that the welfare state would just have to cease to exist.
Yeah.
I mean, they just wouldn't. The money printers, they wouldn't have enough money printers to burr enough of that stuff out, and like they wouldn't be able to. Not there's not enough tricks in the book that the Fed could pull to keep inflation from just skyrocketing
Right.
if they didn't put some kind of restriction around it.
Yep.
And
Thank you, Austrians.
yeah,
Like that's one of the
yeah,
greatest contributions to them, because I think it's one of those that, and I love economics. Oh my gosh, I love economics. But it's one of those that I think you get into it and you're like, oh my gosh, this is why libertarianism is a complete philosophy. Whereas
yeah,
I think you see the Democrats and the Republicans flip positions so often on when
sure,
they're okay with government tyranny. Like, and you're just like, wait, I thought you guys were for small government. Now you're okay with Ron DeSantis banning, people teaching this. And oh, wait a minute, Democrats, I thought you guys were like, hey, disparate outcomes are racist, but now let's pass this law that like disproportionately affects black people and fire them because they don't have their vaccine passports. It's like, well, guys, like, give me some consistency here, and this is where libertarianism really comes in to save the day. Not that every libertarian has to be like an Austrian economist, but that at least we understand that it's never okay. Like the government
yeah.
situation is never all right.
I guess you don't have to be like a educated Austrian, economically minded person to be a good libertarian.
No.
I do think that if you take consistent libertarianism and apply it to economic principles, it's going to be hard to come up with a different framework than what the Austrian, economic model gives you.
Yeah.
Because I think, and it's like this is where some people don't like this idea that like the Mises libertarians put out, but I almost think I think it's true. I think that all rights at the end of the day, at least in the libertarian sense, are property rights,
Mhm.
and that extends to you because like of self ownership,
Sure.
and really all property rights stem from self ownership. And this is one of the things I loved about. And I know, Hans Hermann Hoppe is another controversial figure within libertarian circles, but I really like his argumentation ethics as a kind of like um, intellectual proof of property rights. Just basically being like the minute you start to argue against property rights, you are kind of inherently demonstrating the sort of like norms and kind of conceding to certain like just the act of arguing kind of concedes the idea that people are self owners.
Yeah.
And from that point, if people are self owners, well then to be consistent, you have to say that they own their labor, which means they own their property. So to argue
Mhm.
against property rights is a self-defeating exercise. And so I think that now some people don't like that because I guess it's not fluffy enough, or it's like it seems, and I was that way too when someone first put that to me, like all rights are property rights. I said, I don't know, that seems a little bit too shallow. And I think that that's a somewhat legitimate criticism, but I think it's if you're just looking at it from a strictly economic sense, and like what I often say is like libertarianism is a thin philosophy that describes your relationships between people and what the norms of property rights are and should be.
Yeah.
And it is necessary but not sufficient when we're talking about morality. You can be consistent among libertarian principles and respecting private property rights, but you can still be a bad person. You were kind of
Oh,
referencing this earlier, where it's like, this kind of dichotomy between like libertarians who are like, well, I can do all this stuff because it's not against the non-aggression principle. And it's like, okay, well, sure. And we're not going to, as libertarians say, we're going to legislate your behavior, even if we find it
yeah.
awful.
Mhm.
But we can still call it awful.
Sure, and you contribute to a culture that makes people say we need a state because this guy's an idiot. You know what I
True.
mean? And so then it's like you are not helpful to me because you are the reason people like call for the state. You know what I mean? And you people are like, well, what about this idiot? If he gets a hold of like, if he gets his freedom, then all of a sudden he's got. I mean, the whole like, let's sell children and how much would they go for and have them in my basement and they're not their property and not people yet, and
Yeah, that's one of my
and
biggest pushbacks against Rothbard is the idea that parents own their
sure.
children. It's like, nope,
It's one of
can't
the
go there.
one of the greatest things about libertarianism, though, is that it is a buffet. We're able to take what we like and leave what we don't. Is that, and I think that there are amazing contributions. And I think this is kind of the problem that we have within libertarian circles as far as conversation goes right now. We make somebody about all their evils or make somebody about all their
Yes.
goods and just pretend like there's nothing in between. Like, they're usually, the criticisms that some of these guys have are absolutely legitimate. They need to be addressed. And we can even say, like, yep, you're spot on there. I don't agree with what Rothbard says about kids. You know what I mean? Like, fine. That doesn't discredit everything else that Rothbard has done, right? Like,
Sure. Yeah.
late Rothbard sucks, and I think everybody kind of knows that. But, like, I mean, Anatomy of the State, like, I mean, that's amazing, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, like, there's
Yeah.
certain things that you could just be like, you know what? And people get so, like, offended, they get entrenched, when somebody attacks, like, somebody, their hero, somebody that's taught them an awful lot. I can have a respectful disagreement with somebody like Molyneux, because I find that, like, his collectivism is bad, but, like, ultimately the stuff that he says about peaceful parenting is good. The stuff that he says about, government being bad, and I like his work about anarchy and how it's practical. And we haven't had a lot of functional voices, like, besides like Friedman, about like what like hypothesizing what that post-government
Oh
society
yeah.
would look like.
Mhm.
There's very few voices
Yeah.
that,
Say
have
what you
done it.
want. What sucks is I don't know why, but all the good libertarians that have written good works on like how an anarcho-capitalist society would play out or like theorizing about it, a
Hmm.
lot of them have kind of gone down that like weird pipeline
Yep.
Molyneux has like in Molyneux, like at least like I feel like he didn't take the train the whole way. Like I feel like he took it down like a stop and got off. Then you have guys like Chase Rachel's that like took it the whole way to the end. Like Chase
Right.
Rachel's book, I forget what it was called. It was like crap. He wrote a book that was kind of in the same vein of like explaining anarcho-capitalist or just anarchist ways that like society could organize in a spontaneous fashion in
Right.
a free market. And it was
Yeah.
really good. And it was before he went off the rails. But now because he went off the rails, it's like you don't dare recommend that book to
Right. You can't
anybody.
say it. Right. Lou
I think it
Rothbard.
actually was called Spontaneous Order, actually. I think that was the name of the
Yeah.
book. It was Spontaneous Order by Chase Rachels. And it's still like, once I know somebody is like a good libertarian and it's like, listen, I'm going to let you, I'm like, I have a PDF of it. I'm like, read this, forget who the author is. Like the stuff is still good. Just don't like, go look him up and think that anything he says now is
Right. You
worth
almost want to
listening
just like
to.
clip out the author, like, and just
Yeah.
like give them the pages of the book. You clip out the bad sections. But that's the cool part, is like, libertarians, we can. Like, this is the great part about individualism, right? Because
Sure.
I can say, like, this is consistent with my philosophy, this is not, and so I'm going to take this, I'm going to leave that. You're at a buffet and somebody can be like, the same person who's cooking in the back could have made the chicken legs and the pizza and the spaghetti. But if you ever seen like spaghetti at a buffet and it's like swimming in water and you're just like, nah, like, that's not, but that doesn't mean the drumsticks are bad. Like, it's like just being like, no, everything that person has touched, I condemn. There's certainly an element of when somebody said enough problematic things that you just kind of need to be like, or maybe one significantly problematic thing that you're just like, that is inconsistent with liberty, and I can probably find somebody who says it better. Like I think there's moments where there's somebody who's like, I'm going to take what you said, somebody else said it as well or better, and because you're so problematic, I'm just going to kind of write you off. But that's but I mean, that's
It's
just as
a,
far as we explain it to our
yeah.
friends. I mean,
It's a balancing act, and like
yeah.
there's also like one of the motivations I had to talk to Molyneux was like he still has now it's not like as much as it probably was, but he still
Mhm.
has like a following, like people that are like big
Sure.
proponents of him and followers of him, and I knew talking to him meant that I could put my voice out there to his followers, and I wanted them to hear my perspective, and I wanted to be able to have the opportunity to talk to Molyneux to be like, listen, really value all your stuff over here.
Hmm.
This stuff I kind of disagree with you on. Now, I don't like, and I know I don't think you like it either. I don't like when people just go after someone like Molyneux and go, he's a racist, he's a collectivist. Don't talk to him. I'm like, well, to me, there's three problems with that.
He
One,
may be both
you're
of those things, but there's still a good reason to talk to him, right?
well, and it's like people, it's like people can be something to a certain degree, right? Like I
Hmm.
think it would be
Yes.
incorrect to say Molyneux is 0% racist. I think it would be wrong to say he's 100% racist.
Sure.
He's somewhere in that kind of like mushy middle. I couldn't put an exact number to it.
Right.
Um, the important thing for me, like where I draw my line, is like if you have some irrational collectivist or racist ideas, but you're not pushing for like genocide or violence, or and even Molyneux goes as far as to say, well, I condemn racism and you
Yeah.
shouldn't, like he's a little bit contradictory with some of the other things he says, but he says, listen, you shouldn't judge individuals by group averages or by stereotypes or whatever. And like, and he's strongly come out and said, I condemn white nationalism, I
Sure.
condemn
Yeah.
eugenics. So it's like, okay, like if you're willing to publicly strongly condemn those things, then I'm willing to at least be charitable with you on those areas where I like would usually be a little bit like, not sure about that.
Right.
So that's part of it. And the other thing is like, and we talked about this, and you brought it up too. It's like I think when we don't engage those people, we're hurting ourselves because we're not able to effectively help people when they're infatuated with those ideas because we are not sharpening our skill set to be able to talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Being able to talk to Molyneux and have that little bit of a spar that we did, I'll be even better and more prepared next time that conversation comes up, whether it's with him or somebody else.
Sure.
And then two, I think it's good for his audience to see somebody push back on him, and not push back with the "you're a racist," but push back with like, "Here's a legitimate argument against your view." Like, let's take, like, I'm not offended by you. I'm not being
Right.
triggered.
Sure.
I'm validating you as a person, as a libertarian. Okay, let's get to the heart of the issue. Here's why I think you're wrong. I think it was important for him and his audience to hear that pushback, and I think it's important for um, all of us to stop treating people like they're not a sum of all of their parts. And if people can have some bad parts to them, but I want to emphasize and encourage the good parts of them while gently discouraging the bad ones, because I think, both from a Christian standpoint and like a psychological standpoint, that's how you encourage people to grow and change in positive ways.
Yeah. You everybody's a mix of bad and good. Anytime we try to idolize or demonize somebody, there's one god, there's one devil, and everybody
Right.
else is in between. So when we try when we get muddy those waters, and kind of try to throw everybody into one camp or the other. I mean, like, do I understand why people think, and I think it's important to say on both sides, like, why do people dislike it? I think Molyneux finds himself driven to, it's tough, when he interviews people that are like, oh, they do race science, right? And there's only, 16 of them in the world, and all 16 of them have been on his show. It's going to make people say, like, I think he has an opinion on this issue. You know what I mean? Like, he's kind of interviewed all the ones, and it's like, well, I've had a couple of people that disagree with race science on the show too. It's like, yeah, but you've gone out of your way to find a lot of these, and I don't. And I think if you have an opinion, this is just natural, right? Like, if I am a capitalist, if I am Tom Woods, I'm not going to have an equal amount of socialists and capitalists on the show. I mean, it's just, you have an opinion. It's what it is. And so I think when you have, the opinion that race science is true, and you do see that these people are oppressed, and this is why I brought it up, is because you kind of talked about this outrage, this silence, this, hey, you can't talk about that. The what I like about race science is that we did it. We saw that it was shit science, and then we were like, okay, now we learn. Like, that's how science. Molyneux even said it himself. Science is a process. It's not just results; it's the process, right? Like, so what you say is, I'm going to assume that these people's brains aren't as developed, or that their brains will lead to certain conclusions more than the others, right? And then you put them in the same environments, you see what you get. When you see similar people in similar environments succeed, and it's not based on race, and then you go, okay, let's adjust my hypothesis and start testing for this. It's that there's
And I think his problem is like an overemphasis on it, because like, to me it's like, I don't know, like I'm not a scientist, and I probably could stand to learn more about like the
yeah,
race and IQ stuff. I've always thought like, okay, like from an evolutionary like analysis, it's like the same forces that led some people to have different color skin, different eye shapes and positions,
sure,
might have had a slight effect on brain chemistry and development. Just like there's some ethnicities that have a higher rate of illnesses, of like one type of illness than another. It's like, but like that's a small drop in the bucket or like just one variable in a multivariable equation.
Yep.
And I feel like the problem with Molyneux and people like him is when there's this um kind of telling focus on that one variable. And like if you
Yeah.
want to say, hey, the variable shouldn't be taboo, it should be at least talked about,
Yeah,
put into
sure.
open
Talk
discussion,
about it.
talk
Please
about it.
research it.
Yeah,
Everybody listening to me, please research race science right now. It will make you not a racist overnight. Like, please research race science. Do it.
yeah.
Sorry,
And
go
to
ahead.
me, it's like, and it's like, I meant to bring this up in the podcast, but didn't get a chance to. To me, it's like, he said his motivation for talking about it is to explain why disparities aren't just caused by like capitalism or the market or like
Yep.
the white patriarchy and all that. It's like I get
Yep.
that, but there's people like Thomas Sowell and other people like brilliant thinkers who have come up with ways of explaining away all the disparities that don't rely on race science.
Yep.
So to
Right.
me, it's like again, it's about, are you looking at this as a complex multivariate equation, or are you? And I think it's okay to criticize him and call him out for that focus on it. I just
Mhm.
wish I remember when he was going down that stuff, I was like, I wish that somebody would not go after him with the "you're a racist" and would instead say, I think that your conclusions are wrong. I'd like to
Right.
come onto the show and have a civil discussion, bring you some graphs, bring you some articles to review ahead of time, and talk about why I think the road you're going down is wrong.
Right.
And that could have, if multiple people would have done that years ago, who knows? Maybe he would have not gone down that rabbit hole as much. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I just find he's such a mixed bag.
Mhm.
Bag. The good is so good and the bad
Mixed
is so
bad.
bad. He's a mixed bad, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of a Freudian slip there.
Yeah.
So it's just like, and yeah, I get why people are triggered by him, but it's just I reached out
I mean,
kind of
triggered's a
like,
little disrespectful, right? I mean, there's scientists that are upset about it because
oh
of the
sure.
science, right? So let's but I mean, continue. Yeah.
Well, when I say, I mean, it's like if someone's wrong, I just think, okay, like, proclaim and show why they're wrong. I don't
Yeah.
think, and this is like we were talking about this in a group chat earlier. I don't know. The way my brain is wired
Mhm.
is and I shared this on my Twitter earlier. It's like I am very quick to read and listen and
Yeah.
think, and I'm very
Mhm.
slow to react. It's like I'm always like, when someone comes at me with stuff, I'm like, pump the brakes, give me time to digest this, give me time to critically review it,
Right.
and I want to give things the most charitable, well thought out, well reasoned, take.
Mhm.
That's people, that's issues,
Yep.
and I think that social media has incentivized a lot of people to do the opposite of that.
Sure.
Unfortunately,
Look what we're
a
in the
lot of
middle of
yeah,
right now with, I mean, COVID, and like if you get to say anything, if you get to even ask a question about anything in the other, of just alternative medicines or whatever, it's going to get marked as partly false. And this is just saying, like, man, I don't know. Like, if you say, like, I don't know, you're going to anger everybody, and there's no good place for you to go. Molyneux
yeah,
said himself, I'm not a scientist. So this is why I asked other scientists. Now, my opinion with Molyneux is, I don't think, I think it's less about the racism and more so he saw, these certain scientists getting banned or, sequestered or punished for their studies, and was like, hey, like, I want to hear what they have to say, and you pushing back against them is going to make me study them more. You said that's even why you had him on your show, because people are so against him, it pushed you into wanting to talk to him, right? And so, like, I kind of feel that that's what led him down that kind of dark path, was being like, these people are getting suppressed and I don't like that. We can think that there's a truth in the universe, but the way that truth comes out is not by force. It is by voluntary solutions. We
mm,
as Christians talk about Christ being, there's no king but Christ, and Christ himself didn't pick up his crown, so there is
right,
no king, right? Like, so why then are we going to try to use this leverage of force against somebody else? I've used the example before, but like the example of Zacchaeus, it's not somebody. It's like you tax
mm,
collecting sob.
right,
No, I'm going to hang out with you. I'm going to spend time with you. I don't even have to condemn your bad ideas. But by the time you are done hanging out with me, you're going to change. And Zacchaeus, sure enough, was like, I got to refund these people's money and I got to make up for it. Like, that's
yep,
what I'm going to do because I was a tax collector. And I mean, Daryl Davis, great example. What
yep,
is it you do? You walk into the lion's den. I mean, how many times does this happen in the Bible, right? We walk into lions' dens, the lions have their mouths zipped shut because they can't do anything to us, right? And I think this is where the Christianity meets the anarchy in me, is that I think that is the path forward for Christians and for anarchists, is that we use this power of truth, this power of freedom of speech, to have better speech, to have
Yes.
superior ideas, and let those win. If it is a fair fight and the state is not interfering, my true belief is that a lot of these anarchist ideas will end up winning the day,
Oh yeah.
because
Yeah.
libertarianism is for dreamers. I mean, there's no, when we talk about no rules, right? Like, you can make a set of rules and other people can voluntarily be part of that if you feel that there are certain sets of rules that work. Capitalism is a great example. There's 6 pillars of capitalism that people follow that I think are all fantastic rules. But if you don't want a part of it, don't be part of it, right? Like, get out of there and say, like, no, I want, you know what? I don't really like the idea of people. Let me try to think of the most offensive one. Oh, that people are allowed to accumulate wealth. There you go. And so I'm going to try to invent a society where I don't. You know what? Liberty's for you. Dream it. Make it
Yeah.
happen. If people don't join it, I mean, I guess I'll say I told you so then, but at least we can be allies until that point, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And it's and yeah, I mean, I think to put a bow in the Molyneux talk, 'cause I don't want to talk about him for the next,
Right.
hour or
Yeah.
so, but it was a calculated decision to talk to him. I knew that there's pros and cons. My hope is that at the end of the day that uh I promoted the good. I hope that I don't think he really dealt with my challenges, but I hope that at least people who are persuaded by his arguments will hear my arguments. And I think my arguments were valid. I hope they get people who think about that stuff to be thinking. And this is a good segue into like we talked about this when you were on my show last. This idea of like internal versus external regulations, and I wanted to get into that because I think we both agree. As libertarians, as those who reject statism, and whatnot, we believe you talked about this. What you said in the last show was because we reject the idea of external regulations, like applying force and coercion on people to get them to do what we want. And I think that's also what Jesus taught us. Like one of my favorite passages is Mark 10:42, where Jesus talks about how he's telling his apostles, listen, the Gentiles, they like to be archists over one another. They like to lord over each other, brag about how much power they have and wealth. It will not be that way among you. And Jesus taught about how being a leader was not about power, but about being a servant. Where this brings us to then is like, so we reject external coercion and force. And even Jesus rejected political power. The way you put it was he didn't even take up the crown like the Jews wanted him to. So then we're looking at internal regulations. And I feel like our country is struggling with this idea, and the liberty movement too is struggling with this idea, which is like, what does accountability and internal regulations look like? And I feel like there's a lot to learn from the Bible, specifically like from
Mhm.
books like Galatians and stuff, about how we should hold one another accountable and how we should impact the culture. So I wanted to get more into that conversation that we started on last time about how, like, both as Christians and libertarians, how should we engage the culture, and what does that look like as far as just the various things going on in our country, and also, I mean, even more importantly, I think within the liberty movement, like if we want the liberty movement to be successful, we got to get this infighting and all this crap going on under control. And it seems a lot of the division in the movement and the party right now is centered around like just differences in culture. And it's like
Yeah.
we're all kind of rejecting the culture of the state, but we have different ideas about what the culture of liberty should look like. And um, I'm trying to figure out, how we can start to reconcile that and come to a common culture and a common like ethos to build upon, where we're no longer fighting. So, wanted to
Yep.
get your thoughts on that.
Um, love is primary. I know we had that Dave Smith quote that says, like, any revolution based on love just isn't going to succeed. If you don't love the people you're fighting for, like, even if you say, like, I will technically fight for you, how hard are you going to fight? right? Like not
Sure.
there's morale is a thing, right? So when we talk about when I'm going to stand shoulder to shoulder with somebody and I don't particularly like the guy next to me, that's hurting morale, right? And a lot of people's solutions to this are exile. And this is the opposite of kind of what I want to do. What I wanted to do was the Jesus example, where you take somebody in and inundate them with these things. There's a lot of calls for outrage, and it's not, I'm going to hammer both sides on this, because here's the thing: the outrage happens because of that lack of internal like regulation that we have sometimes, and that there's oftentimes even an urge to defend somebody for saying something that is particularly off-putting or poor messaging or even just bad liberty, right? Like to say like, no, I love this, like this is, like, and then you're just like, okay, why though? Like because he's your homie, or like you guys just got each other's backs? Because then how does that look to everybody else, But like at the same time, what the call is it's for outrage and exile, and it's almost like there's never enough. Like, so what you'll do is you'll repudiate what the person says, and they'll be like, no, I want them kicked out. Or you'll kick them out, and then they'll say, I also want you to condemn this guy who said something similar. And you're just like, they're like, when you start pulling it the thread one way or another, the whole sweater's going to unravel. And there is a way of dealing with these things. Almost the entire New Testament is letters from Paul dealing with this kind of thing, because
Yeah.
every church was dealing with some kind of different cultural issue. Now, what I love about liberty is the same medicine I would prescribe the entire world is the same medicine I would prescribe to the problem that we have now. Because what our temptation is to do is to make laws, like rules. We try to follow these rules of order, or there's decorum, or there is there is, did you is it the nap, or is it, let's try to, and we try to make these rules for ourselves, like let's just say if it's racist then it gets thrown out, or if it's collectivist it gets thrown out, or if it's socialist it gets thrown out, or if it's this. And really what we have to do is we have to take these on individual bases and use our conscience that were given to us. This happens in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that there is a condemnation of the rule of law, because what it does is it forbids people from doing the right thing. You can see with the spy in Jericho, where it's like, man, you helped us, and they're like, so do we kill her because that's what the law says? And God's like, what? Then why did you make that stupid law? Like, is that what your heart tells you to do, to kill the people who helped you? Like, no. Okay, then maybe go with that, right? Like this is I made you in my image. Like you have within you the powers of a deity if you just unshackle yourself. And what we keep doing is we get caught up in these laws. The reason we make laws is because it helps us create an even playing ground. Like when we're playing football, we say like we all agree to the same rules. Okay, we can have a football game. Our worry is that if we don't make a whole bunch of laws, that we can no longer get along together, that we're not able to communicate anymore, that we're not able to participate in basically the same game anymore. But that's really not the case, because I think if both people are leading with a strong sense of common sense and a strong sense of conscience, that we can kind of deal with this. Because I believe that the people who are truly unconscionable, that are terrible, they aren't going to work, in a free market. Like, and it's not that we need rules to get these people out of here. Ultimately, their beliefs are going to isolate themselves. A lot of works about the Civil Rights Act talking about how like businesses were ending racist practices before it came along. It was on that pace. I understand there's some controversy around the Civil Rights Act itself, but like what we can just say is we say that these are kind of things where it's like businesses are like, so I get less people if I discriminate, then I'm not going to discriminate. And I think that there's things that would happen socially with that too. And I think that their solution, on top of just rejecting laws, is also recognizing that God is love, and we talk to each other lovingly. We put love at the forefront, especially as Christians. There is no excuse. God is love. So if what you are doing, if you catch yourself saying something, I do this all the time, no judgment from me, I understand, that if you catch yourself saying something that is not spoken out of love, then it is not from God, and you should not be doing it. And I feel that this would create such a great culture shift, because you look at Jesus constantly talking with people that are not of his fold all the time, and
Yep.
bringing people into his fold. And that's what we need to start doing as libertarians when we focus on that culture. When we say like, hey, I recognize that you don't think you're part of our fold and you're participating in these and these and these behaviors. Maybe try these out. Maybe hang with me and my homies for a bit, and I think you're going to change, right? Like this is going to be a different situation when you're done with it. And for me, I think I see a lot of people not eager to lead with love, because what they do is they see something and they're eager to defend it because they don't want to think about what somebody else feels about it. They're not acting with love towards them, or they're eager to condemn it because they're not thinking about the love or compassion towards the person who spoke it. And it's a mess, and it's always going to be a mess because we're all humans, right?
Sure.
But
Yeah.
when we navigate the mess, what we can show people is what we should be showing people, especially as Christians, is how to communicate with a superior way, in the way that Christ spoke, right? And I'm already stuttering enough that Christ, I'm sure, would be like, yeah, superior speaking, right? But at least take in some of the principles and say like, hey, there's a good way to talk to somebody that makes them feel more welcome and makes them realize that what they're doing needs to change, even if it's not outright condemnation. You still deal with it, right? Like, you still deal with Zacchaeus. This is not, yay, Zacchaeus, go Zacchaeus, tax collecting's
Sure. Yeah.
awesome now, right? But this is still like, but it's also not Zacchaeus, get the frick out of the city, everybody throw a stick at Zacchaeus,
Yeah.
right? This is, let's work on this by getting him surrounded with a culture. I'm gonna talk about one more thing, and I'm gonna let you cut loose for a while because I've gone on. Caesar Milan, whenever there's a dog that really, really, really has a lot of trouble, uh, he brings the dog over to his other dogs, and that's how the dog gets fixed, because that culture among his dogs
Mm.
is superior to the culture that dog had before. And that dog's one, like, tough life, wicked ways, whatever you want to call it, of the dog end up getting ironed out, right? And so, and I think that that's a great solution, because what that is, and what that shows us, is that discipline, it might be our first step, but if that doesn't work, culture is the better solution for these
Yeah.
dogs, right? Discipline's what we usually try first, right? Because it's easier. But culture is the superior solution when we're like, man, discipline didn't work. Yelling at them didn't work. Robbing them of friendships didn't work. Cutting them off of social media didn't work. What do? Introduce them to a culture that's actually helpful and actually like healing. And then that's when the dogs kind of go like, oh, this is good. And humans behave much the same way, that we're like, oh, this is what it's like to be part of a healthy environment. I don't want to disrupt this. How do I become a part of it? And they kind of start to adopt the lifestyle.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. We try
Yeah.
to go back and kind of tackle things in order.
Take your time. I won't
Yeah,
interrupt.
it's fine. So the first thing I wanted to touch on in that, you were talking about the when you kind of make a reference to to messaging, when somebody says something and it's either like it's off color, or it's like, we don't think that this is, even if it's not like, I don't know, in bad taste, it's like you're putting a message out there. Like, we can use like New Hampshire as a common example, where it's like, even like a tweet, like they had some tweets that were like, okay, you're making a kind of edgelordy kind of like, shit posting kind of message, and we don't want to really attract that. Then there's like the child labor tweet, which was phrased a bit more like not as offensively, but it's talking about a topic in a way that's like, okay, well, is that the first thing we want to talk about? And that the New Hampshire was is often a affiliate we go back and talk about a lot, because it's something people know about, and it's good to bounce these ideas off of
Yeah.
those examples. My my reaction to New Hampshire and to bad messaging in general, and I think that at times the New Hampshire messaging was bad, but my problem with the response I saw from a lot of the party and the movement was immediately calling for heads, and also not, I think, not understanding kind of like human, like basic human psychology, kind of like we talked about earlier. Like, to me, it's like people aren't going to change because you come at them and attack them. And actually, when people get attacked, they get defensive. They kind of like, they put their guard up. They kind of like a turtle. They get more into their shell.
Yeah.
And I think you're bringing biblical references up, like Zacchaeus, and I think that's wonderful. And I think the Bible teaches this. I think psychology teaches this too. And it's there's psychologists have written on the art of how people have their mind change, and a lot of it is what you talk about. It's about being surrounded with a culture of people that puts them into the right frame of mind to where they can have, like, they're willing to have their mind changed. And that's half the battle, is getting somebody to that point where they're willing to have their mind changed.
Yeah.
Um, but when somebody does something we disapprove of, I feel like, yes, we need internal regulations, but I feel like a lot of time people are trying to model their internal regulations off of the state. And it's like they're internal regulations that are poor copies of what the state used to do, which is like, we're going to attack people, we're going to punish people, kind of like discipline, what you talked about. But
Mhm.
to me, it's a warped understanding of discipline. Like, one of the things that my prior guest is good on is peaceful parenting. And one of the things that Christians will often point to is like, well, the Bible says, spare the rod, spoil the child. It's like, well, again, it's the rod of discipline, but what is the biblical, and even more like, what is the Jesus centric and consistent view on discipline? And I think the message that Jesus taught on discipline was not kind of like force and attacking people, and at the same time, it wasn't just condoning their behavior and saying, "Hey, everything goes. Do whatever the heck you want." Like, Jesus did confront people and challenge them on their sin, but it's about how you do it. And the goal shouldn't be to make the person feel as bad as possible and to uh, beat them up for how bad their mistakes were, but instead to, in a loving fashion, and a humble fashion too, to be like, not on some kind of high horse, like, like, and like what you said, it's like, hey, I've made these mistakes too. There are times that I screw up, and we have to approach our brothers and sisters with humility, to be like, listen, I'm a fallen son of Adam or Eve, just like you are, and I'm not any better than you, and Christ died for you as much as he died for me. So this isn't about judgment or condemnation or me thinking I'm better than you. This is just me trying to help you. And I feel like Christians are always struggling with this, and it's like it's mirroring what libertarians are struggling with too, which is like, we recognize when, like, the errors that are made, but um sin is bad not just because, like, God says, okay, murder is bad because it's just bad. Like, it's just an assertion. It's bad because it's not even just bad because you're initiating aggression. It's bad because it's bad for your soul. Because when you hurt somebody or when you sin, you're actually, the person you're hurting the most is yourself. And so Christians have oftentimes fallen short of uh approaching people in the way that Jesus did, which was like, I think this was demonstrated with when he said, like, let he who had without sin cast the first stone, when he was like stepping in between the mob and the prostitute, and like, he stood up for her, he loved her, but then he also told her to go and sin no more.
Yeah.
So there's this dichotomy of loving people and affirming them as a person, and then providing gentle correction that comes after we've uh affirmed them and reassured them that, like, we're on the same team and I'm for you. I'm coming to you, not in a, I'm coming down hard on you and trying to dominate you or trying to control you. I'm trying to help you. I'm looking out for your well-being. And I'm also like, we're on the same team fighting for liberty. And I don't think what you're doing is beneficial to that. At the same time, sometimes those efforts are going to fail. Well, then I think we have to look at this through the view of the market. And if I don't like the way that Amazon is running their business, my boycotting and protesting them is legitimate. Like, you're allowed to do it. But this is kind of like what we were talking about earlier, and the Bible even talks about this, like when Paul says everything is permissible but not everything is beneficial. So just because boycotting and protesting are allowed, and they might sometimes be necessary in a market setting, but I feel like those are last resorts, and for certain situations, I don't think those should be our primary tools in our tool belt. Like, they should be the not things we're pulling out every time. I think the solution to bad messaging ultimately is just good messaging, which is like, crowd out the bad ideas with the good ideas. And for one, when you attack the bad ideas, you're actually promoting them more. Like, you're getting them more exposure, especially with the way social media works. When people ratio a tweet, even if it's like, okay, the ratios were bad, but now everyone's seen it. Whereas if it was bad and you just went, I don't like that, I'm going to go put out something better, that's competition and market forces at work.
Yes.
That, like, and when there's people that put out those bad tweets, they don't get any reaction on it, they go, I guess that sucked. That's probably not the way to go. When they get all that negative reaction to it, some people say, well, why don't they change their behavior? Well, they might be looking at it incorrectly. They just look at, oh, look at how many reactions total I got. I got a lot of exposure, so it's just a win. And it's like, well, you're not looking at the whole situation, and like you had a lot of exposure, but a lot of it wasn't that great. But then also, I think that part of the problem is that the way human psychology works, and even the way that sin works, is that when people get come at you and you get attacked, there's a bit of a dopamine rush and a bit of a response to that. And this is like, we were talking about this earlier in a group chat where I was like, some people, it's like when you give them that negative attention, they actually feed off that. And that fuels them to keep doing what they're doing because they think, oh, well, if I'm upsetting people, I must be doing something right. It's a faulty way to view the world, but it's kind of like you're trying to fight fire with fire and you're just going to make more fire. And at some point it's like, how do you put out a fire? You cut off the oxygen. And I think that's how you have to deal with a lot of, if you see something bad on social media, oftentimes the best thing is to ignore it and let that person just kind of like in a market, if you put out a bad product, like no one needs to go and protest your bad product. You'll get the market correction of no one buying your product. And when no one buys your product, it's like, oh, cool. Well, this is a bad product, I guess. I need to go and come up with a better product.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm coming from.
Yeah, it's you establish a lot of validity with yourself. One of the tactics that I've had, we've talked about this before as well, is I'll look and I'll find some, if somebody says something I disagree with, and odds are they've got popular for saying it because that's what happens, right? Like you struck a match, people pour gasoline all over it, now it's out of control, and now it's just this really, really bad negative thing. New Hampshire is a great example of this. Because actually what's funny is they had the child labor tweet that went bad, and 24 hours earlier, I think they had a tweet that went great, because what it was about child labor, and it was this story about this girl who worked in a flower shop who, is getting punished by these child labor laws, and it's totally voluntarily, and she's trying to help her family through it. This is an innocent victim that the state is punishing. Great
Right.
traction on that, lots of great shares, it got a lot, and then less than 24 hours after, they obviously had the other one that didn't do so well. But I guess it did well as far as views. It did not do well so far as and so it's like when it comes to creating traction, there's a good traction and a bad traction, right? Like I understand, like sometimes you feel you need to troll, but the funny thing is, like, you succeeded. Like they actually had one where I was like, nice, like this actually got a lot of attention. And then this other one comes in later, and it's like this one got about the same amount of attention, but unfortunately it's all bad. It's tough, and this is kind of why I reject the rule of law in this, because he said, like, what's the stage where we suffocate it out? Because that's how I like to deal with it as well. That's my primary thing.
Yeah.
If somebody says something bad, cut it off, give it no fuel, give it no fire, give it nothing, and hopefully it dies off. The problem is when there's other people that are actively adding gasoline to it, and that's usually when I have to get involved, and I'm like, guys, here's why this is bad. Like, you know what I mean? Like when Fox News picks up the New Hampshire tweet, then it's like, okay, I have to say something.
Well, yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
at that point, it already grown. But I think like my challenge to people was like, it wouldn't have gotten to Fox News if it hadn't been first so heavily ratioed by, and like Twitter doesn't care. Like if something has a lot of bad interactions, it's still going to get seen by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? And so it's like, to me, it's like you're not helping I feel like some people, I talk every episode, I bring up my two favorite words. It's all about time preference. And it's like, what's the right way to react to it? Well, if you're only looking at it in like this tiny hyper bubble where you think everything that happens in the next 24 hours is the most important, you might feel like, I have to comment on this and tell them why they're so wrong and why this is so bad. But if you look at it over the long haul, it's like, all right, well, maybe that is actually going to create a bad incentive structure that's going to create more bad messaging and more tensions. And there have been times where libertarian Twitter or social media or candidates have said things that I think are bad. And I can go back to Gary Johnson and Bill Weld and things that they said that were bad, or even Joe Jorgensen, Spike Cohen, times that I would criticize them, although I was much happier with Joe and Spike than I was Gary and Bill. But at the same time, at the same time, what I hear a lot more from people when they are rejecting the Libertarian Party or the movement is not like there's one time there was this libertarian platform or person that said something that really upset me. A lot of times it's like the party is a joke, all they do is fight each other, or they're just not convinced. Like a lot of times what we think is a big deal, the rest of the world has forgotten. And it's like, you know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
one of those things where like it was a story one day, but then like a week later, it's like they don't even remember. And but
Right.
what they do remember is that, well, I just don't believe in their ideas. I don't think their ideas work. And so the more time we spend just attacking each other and ripping into each other is less like again, like which brings us back to Austrian economics again. Like time is a scarce resource.
Hmm.
Energy is a scarce resource. Social media activism is a scarce resource. Even it seems infinite sometimes, but you know what you choose to promote and what you choose to engage in, like, you know, those are the sows that you are the seeds that you're sowing, and you're going to reap from that. So, should we be putting our time into attacking or building? And I feel like if you're looking at this from a libertarian, uh, Austrian perspective, like an economic perspective, the best thing to do is to build your own brand and to build the best product possible to succeed and less time shitting on your competition because not everyone likes that. Sometimes people just like, oh, I don't like this competitive. I don't like this business because all they do is badmouth the competition. They could have an objectively better product than the competition, but sometimes that rubs people the wrong way when it's like, I just don't think it's in good taste that they're always, you know, like I'm very careful in my line of work. People
Hmm.
come in and even if they're complaining about an experience they've had at another shop, I don't badmouth that shop or the people in it. I always try to be charitable, try to just like redirect the
Yeah.
conversation. It's just not, you know, um, it's not in good taste to you know it's not a good professional business habit to talk bad on your competitors. But I feel like that should be something that I want to see libertarians, and this isn't a factional thing. This is errors made by people in all over the libertarian spheres, whether they're in politics or not. To
Yeah.
be people that spend way too much time attacking what they don't like and not just building up uh, their own brand and their own services. Like to me, the beautiful thing about economics is the division of labor. So, uh, you know, the libertarian minded people that feel like, hey, the LP isn't the best route. We need to engage in agorism. Cool. Go be the best agorists you can be and build those networks of counter economics and encourage people in your local community to do that stuff and use it as a means of activism. Great. But
Yep.
when you spend half your time doing that and half your time shitting on people who have decided I would rather be involved in politics, you're not only not helping the movement in terms of like the way it looks, you're also hurting your efforts in building a better, you know, agorist activism. Same thing goes within the party. When there's people that criticize like the Mises caucus that I'm in, it's like, okay, maybe the Mises caucus is doing it wrong. I would encourage you to go do it better than us and just outcompete us, outwork us. And then like, you know, 2 years from now, it's like, hey, these people they raise more money than us, they got more candidates elected than us, they've affected more change in the culture and the movement, our numbers are dropping, we've lost. To me that is infinitely better than you're not doing anything positive, but what you're doing is uh you know just endlessly attacking and complaining about what other people do. And you know, and there's even times I have to tell my Mises caucus associates to be like, hey, other people in the party and the movement, they don't have to do what we do. And we have
Yeah.
to respect that. You know what I mean? If somebody says, I don't, you know, care about messaging so much, I think there should be a pragmatic caucus. I think there should be a caucus that says we stay out of messaging, we stay out of ideology, and we just focus on how do you win an election. And we
Hmm.
focus on making sure that we focus on ballot access. We focus on all the nitty gritty details. And that's our
Yeah.
niche. That's our part. That's our contribution to the marketplace. Like
Right.
libertarian activism is a marketplace, and I think we need to start viewing it that way.
I mean, you've talked about its division of labor before. We've had a dialogue about this, that you know, you just be good business partners with the people that you do that aren't necessarily in your line of work. Let's talk
Yeah.
about it this way. Let's pretend I'm trying to get people to eat healthier, right? Do I want to spend all of my time if I open a store, right, and I sell salads? okay, and I'm just a big salad store. Do I want to spend 90% of my effort crapping all over the people down the street who sell vitamins? Or do I want to spend 90% of my time crapping all over the big burger joint next door? You see what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there is a totally there's a loss of perspective there for a lot of people. Now, peacemaking goes two ways, right? Because if we're talking about being the peacemaker, first, yeah, you got to try to not view everything as a fight. You have to say, you have to be delivered a fight and say, how can I make peace out of this? How am I going to do it, right? Because what happens is we show up late almost all of the time, right? Like most of the time, like by the time a bad tweet reaches our eyeballs, it's a fight. It's a mess. And so what
Yeah.
peacemakers do is they say, how can I look at this and make peace? Now, majority of the time, people don't care about peacemaking because they don't have a Christian mindset about it. They want to conquer. They want to say, they take out their sword, they try to strike down one
Yeah.
of the sides, and they say like, yes, I killed that side because I own the libs, or I those rhino cucks or whatever. I nailed them, and it's like, okay, well, that's not what peacemaking's all about, right? So you need to be able to see a fight and stop it. The other part of it is you need to see a fight developing and stop it. When you talked earlier about time preference, time investment, usually by the time a bad tweet reaches our eyeballs or our fingertips, it's too late. That fight's gone. It's out there. There's not much we can do about it, and it sucks. But what we can do is we can see people that are going down this path and be like, hey, man, like, can I talk to you with this real quick? And what you got to do is you got to invest in that person beforehand.
Yeah.
Identify areas of similarity. Identify yourself as a friend. Become that person they go side to side with, and then be like, hey, man, I just heard you talk about how like black people aren't as smart as white people, and that's just science. Can we talk about that real quick? Because what's going to happen is they're going to say that, and maybe the first few couple times they hint at it or throw it out there, it doesn't get much traction. But you as a friend need to be able to pick that up and be like, hey, let me show you some like science on this so we can really like nip that in the bud, right? Or I can see like when you say stuff like this, maybe what you're even saying is technically correct, but can I show you the other point of view? Because this is communication, right? When you talk about steel manning earlier, being able to phrase what the other side is going to see. What
Oh
somebody
yeah.
who is of not your opinion, you need to be able to phrase your opinion better than them. That is if you want to win every argument for the rest of your life, do nothing more than that. Put the argument that you have, it's there, it's not going anywhere. Yeah, put a lid on it, hold that to the side. Engage in the person, fully encompass their argument, and then be able to say, so what I understand is this, and whatever comes out of your mouth needs to be phrased even better than the way that they would say it.
Right.
Because as soon as you do that, that kind of enables you to smack it down. Because what you do is it's like a set in volleyball, right? Like to say like I'm setting myself up. If I'm constantly badgering you, I'm putting it back over the net immediately, right? If in volleyball, if I'm just constantly hitting the ball back over the net, that's bad, right? Because what you want to do is set yourself up in the best situation possible. So when you say like, hey, do I understand your argument like this? I hear you're voting for Trump or Biden. Do I understand that the reason you're voting for him is this, this, and this, like, and whatever it may be, right? So you phrase it, you got it that certain way. And then you say like, and when they say, yeah, that's exactly how I feel, you go, okay, you set yourself up perfectly, because what you just did is you now know the argument because
Yep.
you said it, and they're like, yeah, that's exactly it. And that enables you to spike the ball. That's when you get a real good hit over the net, as opposed to we're constantly doing these bumps over the net, right? Like back to you, back to you, back to you. They're uneventful and they're boring. If you really want to win every argument for the rest of your life, you steel man the other person's point of view, you let them know, you understand, and then you really set yourself up to succeed. And so I think what that is that enables that is a practice of befriending somebody, and this is a long-term goal. This is why I talked about the time preference of it. What we're constantly doing is very reactionary. Most people who
Yep.
play the market lose. Why do they lose? Because they sell low and they buy high,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so what we do is we see this big fight on Twitter and we join the fracas. And we're like, that's too late. You missed it. The time to buy in on that argument was yesterday, was 15 hours ago. Heck, sometimes it's 10 years ago with that friend who you had who has now gone down this really scummy, bad messaging path, right? Like that was your opportunity. But look around today. Remember this lesson, because what happened is that could have been prevented 10 years ago. How many friends do you have today where you say, I know this guy, I'm friends with this guy, I'm concerned about the direction he's heading? Well, don't shut up about it. If you're his friend and he trusts you, talk to her, talk to him, like whoever it is, just be like, hey, like, here's our areas of agreement. I think you're a pal. I really respect what you have to think. I really respect your perspective. If I understand your perspective, can I offer you a counter perspective? I think you might find it more successful. And it just works better. It works better that way. I mean, brings more people to liberty. We're always buying late on these things, and it's constantly, people are addicted to the fire, right? Like, this is just when something's on fire, and I get it, right? Like, because I mean, it's spicy. When you see somebody call like Timothy McVeigh a hero, you're like, like that's a fiery hot mess, and you just want to like throw yourself in there and be like, this is a mess, but like, when was the right time to get to him before he said Timothy McVeigh or Ted Kaczynski was a hero? It was 5 years ago. It was 10 years ago. It was 2 years ago. It was
not a fan of that tweet. If people know the tweet that Hodey's talking about,
right.
And at the same time, it's like, okay, we could all gang up on him and attack him and tell him, well, that's the dumbest thing. It's offensive. What are you doing? And I guarantee it wouldn't be productive at all. Whereas I feel like if people didn't engage with him too much on Twitter, but people who know him kind of said, hey, let's get together, let's grab a beer, let's talk, let's go get on a Zoom call or something, and be like, I'm always asking people, like, I had a conversation with a good friend today who got into a skirmish on Twitter, and then he was like, we were going at a bit on Twitter, then let's talk on the phone, and I was just like, all right, what were your goals here? Like what were you trying to accomplish?
Yes.
I asked him that. And it's like, all right, so then you were trying to accomplish this because of these reasons. And so you thought by doing this, you would achieve this outcome. You thought that this would get your point across. It's like, all right, I see where you're coming from. I see what your thought process was. Let me explain to you how I perceived it, how I think a lot of other people perceived it. And here's the words that you used that I think were that led to this misunderstanding and then all this ensuing infighting. Whereas alternatively, I gave him like a different way to phrase the same thing. That like, still got his point across. Still was like, you're like, if your goal was this, you could have said it this way and still accomplished the goal. But instead of an ensuing fight breaking out, people would have heard you, in positive dialogue and discourse could have happened instead of the typical, hours of people tweeting at each other and then blocking each other, and then they don't talk to each other anymore. And then we all get stuck inside these echo chambers. And that's one thing. And I know this. Like, I almost it's almost like part of my personality, it's not ironic that I'm for open borders, because I'm, in my personality, I'm very anti-borders. I'm very anti when people try to box me in. I've had this happen in Christian spheres, like, you can't associate or talk with these types of people. I know there's people in the Christian community who would even probably give me a little bit of grief for talking to you when you're a Mormon. And it's just like, you know what I mean? Like, and to me, that's silly. And then there's people that give me grief because I'm in the Mises Caucus and I associate with some people who aren't big fans of the Mises Caucus. And then I get, of course, but because I'm in the Mises Caucus, then there's just people that reflexively give me crap about that. And, there's all these tensions and I haven't always navigated them perfectly. And I'll be the first to admit that. But I'm always just pushing back against the people who are saying you need to pick a side, embrace the echo chamber, and just tunnel inward. And it's just like, I won't do that, because I don't think that is modeling the Christ-like teaching to be a peacemaker, to build those bridges. And to be fair, it can be really, really hard to build the bridges with the really toxic ones. And I did get to a point over the last 2 months where I got tired of turning my cheek, and my face was sore from being slapped. And I did start to slap back a little bit. And I've tried to disengage a bit and get back to my roots in my center. But it's tough. And so I get it. It's tough when somebody says something nasty about you on the internet, or you see something and it's really upsetting. Like, I feel those same incentives acting on me to, like, I have to respond to this now. But oftentimes it's like, if I just wait even an hour, like, I'll type a draft out. I always tell people, like, here's a good practice to get into. Type something out, save it as a draft, walk away for an hour or two, if or ideally even a day,
Yeah.
come back. Is it still worth saying? Because if it is, post it. Go ahead.
Yeah.
But if you even have a hint of doubt after an hour or especially a day, you're like, yeah, after I've thought about it and chewed on it, this probably is not helpful, and I'm actually like, I've come to see I'm wrong, or even if it's like, okay, I see ways I can say this better and improve upon it.
Yeah.
There's not much, even though like, we were in speech and debate and like that's different, like you're forced to speak on the fly and just put things out there. But even then, it's like, I mean, we put hours and days of preparation into those things. So it was like you were spontaneously talking about things, but you'd already put in hours of prep work into talking about it. Can you imagine if we had to show up and do those events and it was like, hey, you've had no time to research. Here's Google, here's 20 minutes, round starts in 20 minutes and debate it. Like it would have been, a train wreck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tactics. I mean, you started off by talking about tactics, and that's just, I never understand when people don't care about results. Cause I'm like, what are you trying to get here? Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
If it's just to get the dopamine and endorphins from like dunking all over somebody, go play a video game and put it on easy mode. Like there's no reason to make somebody else feel bad, or or potentially make your side position look weaker, if you're getting out there and you're just creating a problem. And I do think, I mean, you talk about times you got sick of turning the other cheek. There is a time when I use the block button. I mean, there's time when I leave a group. I mean, it's just, I think when I talk about the dogs, right? How it's like we want to create a healthy environment for these dogs. I'll take an ill-behaved dog. I won't take somebody who's burning the dog's house down, right? Like there's a difference between somebody who's like, I can get them in on this culture and fix them up, versus somebody who's outwardly hostile towards all of that, and when people start threatening your family, your friends, your,
Yeah.
when they say like, I would love, there's a lot of people I would even love and I even think I can fix, but unfortunately, as soon as you start calling people slurs on my feed, I have to block you. I have to ban you. Like there's nothing I can do at that point.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't think you can be changed. It's that you've put yourself in a position where I have to choose whether I want my trans friends to be comfortable, or my GSM friends to be, comfortable with talking to me and in the liberty movement, or putting up with your loud, idiotic mouth. And unfortunately, like when you force my hand that way, that's something to talk about, like now there are people who I feel like don't go out of their way to be aggressively, like they might be racist, but they're not trying to be aggressive about it, or they're anti-trans, but they're just like, it's just this weird religious belief that I have, or this, this obscure, it's this feeling, or this science, or, whatever, or this YouTube video or something like that. That's just like, this is kind of what's eaten away at me. And that's something I can work with, right? Because you're not actively attacking my friends. And so then you can be like, they can say, I don't respect those friends, but that's why I don't engage them. And then I can work with you and kind of fix that culture around you, versus when there's the other bit, that's kind of when, I mean, I have a substantial block list because, I mean, there's people that just won't leave me alone.
Yeah, I've become more comfortable with the block button as of late. I used to pride myself in like, I don't block anybody. And then a year into libertarian activism, it's like, okay, my block list grew like, I can't even say exponentially, because, anything times 0 is still 0. So it grew infinitesimally.
Right. Yeah. One, then 2, then it grew exponentially.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, and that's a good maybe transition into the last part of the show. Because you and I, like, we're both Christians, and in that sense, we share a lot of cultural views, and like I think that's kind of been evident in our conversations. And even though, like, we have some differences of opinion on things within the party and the movement, oftentimes we can still like we kind of agree on tactics and kind of like a general long-term view in a general sense, I think.
Yeah.
But what you were just describing actually felt a lot like me, where it's like, you tend to be a bit more, I guess, like, you call yourself center, but I often feel like on a lot of the social issues, you tend to kind of be more on the left broadly.
I'm left of you on social issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, for lack, and like, I hate using left versus right terms. It's just like, there's
it's what
no other good
people are using, so I might as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's no other quick way to, explain all this. And I tend to be a bit more conservative in my social views. Now, I don't go out there like beating a drum about it, you know what I mean? And like, and obviously, I'm a pretty radical anarchist, and uh, even if I was going to compromise on minarchy, it should only, a minimal state should only be to protect, people's rights. It should not be to impose any kind of cultural, social, religious norms on people. Um, uh, Actually, one of the reasons I started my podcast was there's a lot of people in my, like, I come from more like the Calvinist Reformed Christian circles, and a lot of them have been going back to this stupid Reconstructionist, theonomist view, like, or dominionism. And I'm just like, ugh, I'm so tired of the, hey, let's try mixing church and state again. It'll work this time. It's like people who refuse to learn from history just, yeah, I have very little patience for that. But but at the same time, I still, like, when it comes to the issues of, like, I mean, there's some things we might agree on. Like, I think you might agree in a general sense, like, it's preferable to save sex for marriage, and stuff like that. But when it comes to, like, sex and, like, we're talking about the GSM community, I
Yeah.
tend to be a bit more conservative on those issues, and I find myself in this weird, uh I don't know, this weird middle ground in the liberty movement where it's like, I don't have any desire to be toxic toward these people and to attack them, but I find, and it's not universal that everyone in the GSM community is part of this problem that I'm about to highlight, because I actually know there are, and people might think I'm making this up, but I'm really not. There are trans people and gay people in the Mises Caucus. Like, it's not all straight white males, contrary to
Of
some
course.
popular beliefs. There's some people that, they have, it's like, um, I don't know, there's this culture about LGBT and GSM that, I don't know, it's like, it's not something that I am particularly a fan of. I don't feel a need to go out and really speak about it, but it's like, I often feel like it's the reverse. That's like, if I don't share these people's exact beliefs on these social issues, and affirm them, like, I have to make these positive proclamations and affirm them. And if I don't do that, then I'll get labeled as a bigot or a transphobe, homophobe, etc. And it's a difficult, um ocean to navigate through. And so I was curious to get your thoughts on that. I mean, when I, and this might be where, I don't know a whole lot about Mormonism, so maybe there's things in there that are influencing our diverging views on this. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear those. Maybe it has nothing to do with it. I don't know. But I just, I don't know. As a Christian, I feel like God made men and women different, equal in a sense of, like, they're both made in the image of God, equal in their rights, but they're different in complementary ways, and they're meant to be, like, when the Bible says, like, talks about the union between man and women, men and husband and wife being reflective of, like, Christ in the church. And I think that, uh yeah, like, so, like, that's where I'm coming from when I feel like marriage should be between a man and a woman. And I don't even know how to feel about uh the debate on gender. That's something where I've tried to read the scientific stuff on it, and I kind of see where they're coming from. But then from a Christian worldview, I have a hard time trying to square it. I know there's one passage that often gets brought up, which is like, in Christ there is no Greek, no Jew, no slave, no free, no male, no female. And, like, yeah, I get that. In a ultimate uh view, and, like, if you have, like, an eternity view of all people, our our earthly categories of, like, male and female are meaningless in the context of the body of Christ. And I think that's true. But I have a hard time reconciling, I guess, like, the LGBT and the GSM culture and movement uh with my Christian worldview, and trying to engage in libertarian spaces where, there's a lot of there's a, healthy number of those people. And yeah, so I rambled on a little bit there. I'll let you chime in with your thoughts.
No, you're good. So just for anybody listening, I actually did recently leave the LDS Church, like a couple months back. So I
Oh,
am,
okay.
I'm just a normal Christian now.
Just a normal. You're a normie.
Right, yeah.
I did not know that. I apologize. I must have. I don't know if did
It's
you
all
make
good.
an announcement or
We actually did an episode on it on Me of My Enemy because
I
Lou is an
totally missed.
ex-LDS memories,
Oh, okay. See, I
ex-Mormon.
saw
So
you guys talking about it in the chat, but like I thought you were just. I didn't know you were going to talk about it, like you were leaving. You left it, so
oh
I
yeah, no,
apologize.
no worries. It wasn't anything grand. Like it's not like I like informed them or burned my membership card. It was like I can't be part of this anymore. And actually, this is a really good example because this goes to talk about that culture problem that you're talking about when you say like, man, I want to get into those spaces, but I don't really like the culture. First of all, I love liberty, but the culture is sometimes cool, right? So
Mhm.
so it's not necessarily that that it's not necessarily the truth always has a good culture around it, right? And so I think I accept liberty as a superior product to
Sure.
authoritarianism. But a lot of times there is an easygoing, kind attitude around authoritarianism. It's not, right? Like we're very careful philosophically to say like it is not a kind philosophy. But then there's this very angry, hostile, um, you know, culture that follows libertarians around. Now, some of the hostility is earned. They're hurting us. People are doing damage to us. We get it, even if it's not damage to us, it's damage to people that we love. We see statism hurting people, and we kind of cultivate this anger.
Yeah.
There's this fantastic book about nonviolent revolution, and one of the identifiers of it, and this is actually there's websites that talk about this as well. That if in successful nonviolent revolutions, one of the things they've managed to do is to cultivate a sense of humor. Um, and if they're just constantly spend all of their time angry, that it doesn't work, right? Because people don't want to be part of something that's angry, because then what you just say is the angry thing is going to take over. It's not just the truth taking taking hierarchy. It's that culture that follows it as well. Now, let me talk about biblical examples of this. How many times did God's church fall apart in the Old Testament because of a poor and sickened culture, right? Like this wasn't just like they forgot the laws. This was like they started treating each other like dog crap, and then the whole church falls apart, right? And then
Yeah.
God comes down after like 2000 or so years, and he's like, "What is this?" And they're like, "Well, these people over there," and it's like, "Oh, geez, like this church is so messed up right now. Like I gotta send like a prophet to fix it, and like let's try to make amends here." And we get some really great insight as far as culture from the prophets as well. I'm really big on a lot of the Old Testament prophets, especially when they talk about matters of culture. Ezekiel's a big one for me. Daniel, actually,
Yeah.
title of the podcast, another great example of talking about cultures that are really sickening, you know. Um, and so what happens is I think the LDS church is kind of there right now. Even if I were to accept that this is the restored church or whatever, right now it's not in a good place. And I don't think that God wants me to be part of something that's not in a good place. You know what I mean? Because I mean, he doesn't even hold it against the people in the Old Testament. Like when their church falls apart, he's like, of course they left because these people are gross, you know?
Yeah.
To as far as the like GSM stuff goes, because I've had a lot of Christians have a tough time reconciling this, and there's a lot of, if you get into the nitty gritty and like the word parts, I have an interlinear Bible at home that it really is kind of easy to explain away a lot of the anti-homosexual stuff in the scriptures. However, at the bottom line, there's always this. And I think that this is important, is that the number one most important law is to love God. Number two is to love your neighbors, right? And how do we deal with people
Agreed.
lovingly, right? Like we got to deal with them in these loving ways. And that is not always affirmation of bad decisions that they're making, but it's also non-judgmental. 3 times the apostles ask Christ how they get into heaven. All 3 times, Christ doesn't say, believe in me, believe in my sacrifice, believe in the cross. He actually says, stop judging people, forgive people, right? Like in 3 separate occasions. So it's not like this was like an occasional
How
one-off
you
verse.
forgive, you will be forgiven. I think was
Correct.
something
The
you said in
stick
Matthew.
with
Yeah.
which you measure others will be used to
Yep.
measure yourself as well, right? So like we have all these like stop judging people verses, and
Yep.
then we even have God doesn't want to give even the 10 Commandments. That's like a whole struggle in the Bible, right? Like Moses, like, oh, we need commandments, like to guide people, and God's like, man, like there's a problem with laws. There's a problem with commandments because then there's a time when it's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to bear false witness. Well, for David to escape Saul trying to murder him, his wife lies about his location, says he's sleeping in the room. And it's like,
Right.
and then it's like God approves of that. And so what, we're like, oh my gosh, but God just approved of bearing false witness. He's like, well, no, I don't want people getting murdered, obviously. Like, there's a common sense hierarchy here, and that's kind of the issue with laws. Look at another one, kosher law, right? Like, what happens when Peter's like, but we're not supposed to eat any of this, and God's like, what are you talking about? Right? So like, what we have is we can find these justifications even in the scriptures, where it's like, where it's like, I think I found an excuse to be like kind of judgmental, or kind of, like negative towards somebody. But I think that what it comes down to is what God specifies as the most important commandments, like love God, love your neighbors, like build them up. And I think that for me is a big one, as far as like why I have managed to generate a lot of allies with the GSM community, because I have no issue with their lifestyle. That's their lifestyle. Like, I want them to find their individuality. If what they're doing is not right, like, here's a good example of one that I think, like, I'm okay with a homosexual couple. And I think when I would say maybe I wouldn't approve of something, like, let's say something that I just don't think works out as well, is when people like really go hard against the nuclear family. I don't believe, like, I'm definitely not for this like patriarchy, I make all the laws and everybody else just follows around me like a little, worm or whatever. But I do think there is a point of being like, hey, let's make sure our sons and daughters are raised and taught and fed, and let's make some people responsible for those, let's give them those responsibilities and tasks to make sure everybody's taken care of, educated,
Sure.
eats, sleeps. I'm not even saying you have to do this by sex, gender, whatever, like whoever teaches anybody, as long as it's all getting done, right? There's a lot of people who are like, what's the problem with having 15 kids, one mom, no dad? And I'm like, well, you may have used your voluntarism correctly technically, but like, are you able to give love to all those kids? You know what I mean? Are you able to give that love? And that, what I make it is, I make it about that standard, not you're attacking me and my Christian nuclear family. Just how well does that work out? Like, how much time and effort are you able to put into your kids when you have that many?
Sure.
Like, or when you say I'm not present and they're in all these different places. Now, if you can, fantastic. But like, this is why it's not my judgment. That's just a result of kind of, I mean, almost capitalism, right? Like, that's just the market.
Yeah.
That's just
Yeah.
what happens.
It's this weird dichotomy between like, and like, I'm with you as far as like, in like what I try to walk is not being judgmental towards anyone for being gay or trans or anything in the GSM, gendered sexual minorities, for those who don't know the acronym. In terms of like, I mean, I really don't like, outside of like the purpose of like talking about it in a podcast, or like if the conversation comes up, I really don't go out there and initiate conversations, or if I know somebody who's gay or trans, I'm not going to bring anything up about like, oh, you're like, the other, like, we all know the cringy Christians that go around and condemning people for their sins, or out there on
Westboro
the street
Baptist,
corners.
thank
Yeah,
God for
like,
dead soldiers outside of the funerals. Like,
yeah, it's like, that's
good job
not
scaring a lot of people away from Christianity.
right. Like, that is not Christ-like at all. But then it's like we talked about throughout this podcast, and you brought it up. It's like, does loving my neighbor mean approving of or celebrating everything they do? And that's the tension that I often find myself wrestling with, and I don't know the exact way to navigate it. No matter what I do, I feel like I'm compromising a little bit, and that's probably part of life. Life is messy. There's always a little bit of compromise when we're dealing with people. I always want to err on love, and like being loving in my treatment of people. But I don't know. I just feel like I can't go to the level that a lot of them want me to go, where it's like I would affirm from just a personal, like, when people ask like, okay, but like, what's your, and I'm always hesitant to answer when people push me to be like, but what do you think? Do you think it's sinful if two guys get married? Do you think it's sinful if somebody goes through gender transition surgery? And I'm always like, I don't know. I mean, and like, you shouldn't care what my views are, because I'm not advocating for the state to do anything about it. But then people, like, they just push you. They want to know what your views are. And it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I just, when push comes to shove, I don't know what I would do if my son came to me and said, that he was struggling with his identity in terms of like being being a male, being a boy. I'd still love my son no matter what his life choices were, but what would I encourage him to do, and how would I take on the role as a father in guiding him? I'm not sure that my first choice would be to just like, jump the gun to being like, well, maybe you aren't a boy. You know what I mean? Like I'm just being honest there. Same with sexuality. And I don't know, like I actually, what's funny is I don't often view gender as being fluid in the way that like it's often modernly talked about, but I actually think sexuality is more fluid than gender, in that like I don't think people are straight and gay. I think there's a lot of people who are kind of like, and I think the Bible even talks about this. Like it's sometimes there are people in what Paul was talking about. I think it was in Corinthians, where like when men in lust, women in their lust, were leaving relationships with the opposite sex for pursuing sex with the same with people of the same sex. It was in the context. So it's like I always feel like there's the Bible is even taught there's a little bit of this fluidity and stuff to as far as sexual attraction goes. With gender, I'm not so sure. I don't know. It's a muddy area, but um, I think that it'd be a lot easier for Christians such as myself who are more conservative leaning in temperament, and in our belief systems to be in positive relationships with people who are, trans or gay or whatever, if there wasn't this culture around it that like, and there's not a good label for that either. I mean, uh, the woke crowd is what it's often referred to, which I feel like is a dumb name, but I don't have a better name for it at the moment, so I reluctantly use it. But it's just this like if it's almost like I feel like around the GSM community, there's this weird secular religion that's been built around these people. That's like, if you want to love and support these people, you must take a openly affirming position of like these statements of principles. And if you don't, uh, you're a bad person, or you're not an ally. You're not, on the in crowd, so to speak. And then
I
in
mean,
libertarian circles, it gets used to be like, oh, you're being anti-libertarian, and so it's like, and this is a lot of, I think, the underlying tensions that also come to bear at the party, because there are people that come to libertarianism that come from the left on
mhm,
these social issues and from the right. Now we all generally agree on, there's some people that might be a little behind on it, but I think 90% of those in the movement, regardless of their views on the social issues, agree on the role of the state in terms of not being involved in it.
sure.
But then it's like, well, what do we promote? And I think some people want the party and the movement to promote the left social values. But then the conservatives are like, but wait, those aren't my social values. So you're kind of excluding us in your attempts to include these people. And that's part of the tensions I see at play here. And I've been struggling to think of what the solution is. Other than, I've always just tried to push, listen, I think libertarian culture should be like, there should be a culture, but we should keep it a thin culture that's centered around liberty and celebrating that, hey, listen, you can have whatever religion, whatever social views you want, so long as you're not advocating that the state be the arbiter of those views to be pushed upon other people. But
Yeah.
the rest of it, we should celebrate. Like, I wish that, like, I like the idea of diversity, but I wish that there could be a celebration of diversity, not just in skin color, not just in ethnicity, but in religious views, in lifestyles, and even in when it comes to what your social views are, in insofar as you're not like, if you have some like truly abhorrent social view, like, I think, homosexuals should be stoned to death. Well, okay, well, that needs to be excluded because you're actually, advocating for violence. But to me, that's where the lines should be drawn. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this is where like I kind of break with a lot of like the libertarians and this is probably why I seem left of others, right? Because there's that like I want to unify around the minimum of liberty, whereas I've kind of pushed for the maximum of liberty. Whereas like there's the don't hurt people, don't take their stuff. That's the minimum of liberty. The maximum of liberty is then the opposite of that, right? Like heal people and give them stuff, right? Like not with the state, not with violence. I get it, but like let's reward them. Now here's the thing: it's not that there's not destructive behaviors, but think about the parable of the prodigal son. Like
Mm.
if you think they're engaging in a destructive behavior, the father in that situation does not have to punish the son. He doesn't even have to tell the son, like, you're making a mistake, you're stupid, you're dumb. Explore the path. That's actually why we're all here on earth. If the point was just to never sin, we stay in heaven and we don't go anywhere. Right? So like the point is to explore all of these things. Now I am a Christian hedonist, which means I believe that God, the reason he issues the decrees, policies, commandments, whatever he may issue, is for our benefit, right? Like that's what a hedonist believes, is that these things are for our benefit. And I believe that God does these things for our benefit. It's not just so that we like suffer because he likes to watch us suffer, or likes to forbid things just because it's hilarious. He forbids them because they're unhealthy for us. They're bad for us. They don't work
True.
out. You
No,
know
I
what I
agree.
mean? Like,
That's kind of what I said earlier. Like, I think sin is ultimately bad because of
yeah.
the harm it causes us.
Right. So the idea is this: if homosexuality is a sin, then we should see a tremendous amount of failure and damage in those relationships that does not pertain to the outside community. I don't have to add any fire to that. If I think homosexuality is a sin, it's gonna fail, right? Like, because
Mm.
that is the standard that I have, because God has decreed no. Now I don't believe this, but if I were to believe that God has decreed no homosexuality, I don't need to enforce that. Christ did not once ask somebody for their gender or sexuality, right? Like,
It's true.
and there's a reason for this, because if they are engaged in a poor sexual behavior that is unhealthy, he can offer an alternative lifestyle, and that's probably the better way to go about it. Now, here's the thing: this is big for me, and this is why, if we do get into the nitty gritty, that I don't believe God rejects trans people or homosexuals. I think he accepts them all. But there is
And
like an area of just being like, if it then does not punish us, and in fact, if these people are loved, embraced, praised for their individualism, that they don't suffer the way that the others do. So much of this manufactured stuff, because we as Christians, I'm not responsible for your sin if I think homosexuality is a sin. Like I said, I don't, but let's just say it. If I think homosexuality is a sin, I'm not responsible for that sin. What I am responsible for is if I torment you and hurt you and ridicule you and you kill yourself. That is on me, right? So like I am absolutely on the hook for people that I hurt because I know better, right?
mm,
Like, so if I am saying hurtful things to you, and I am the one inserting the damage. Like I said, like racists, the reason they pay the price on the open market is because people don't like doing business with them. I
sure.
view the exact same way with homophobes, right? Or like even if we don't like the term homophobe, because like even when I was against homosexuality in my younger days, like I was never afraid of it, right? Like I understood it. Like I don't like the term homophobe because that implies you're like afraid or something. I just
Yeah.
saw it as like a sin, right? When I got to understand what a sin was, is a sin was to be without God, right? Like that's sin, without. And so if I say they're living a life of sin where God can't be in there, then that's a punished situation. That's a prodigal son, and they'll come back, right? They'll come back aching, bruised, beaten, and say like, boy, that was tough. If instead though I say, here's your inheritance, go do your best, because that's what the father does with the prodigal son, right? Gives him his inheritance early, says, go out, I'm praying for you, I love you, and you've got a home here if you ever want to come back. Prodigal son does his thing, comes crawling back. Now there's certain behaviors that are very different. So let me use a different one: gambling, right? Like
Mm.
that's something that's libertarians are super cool with, and I will fight tooth and nail for you to have the right to gamble. Okay, you should be able to gamble online. You should gamble on the horses, dog. You should be able to go to the track. I guess there's some animal rights in there, stuff that I don't want to get into, but yeah, you should be able to gamble on sports and whatever you want. I believe it is a terrible idea, and I believe you
Yeah.
can really do a lot of damage to yourself just spiritually. You talked earlier about how much that it punishes the soul of the statists, like who act with the authority of the state, who take stuff. You took my stuff, I'm a victim, but my spirit can remain intact when you take my stuff. If you steal somebody's stuff, your soul does not remain intact, right? Like you've severed a tie there that God is like, no, like you are like, that's not something that fits in my presence. So one of the reasons that I've accepted homosexuality, we can go verse by verse and argue all day, but I think the importance of it is this: is I remember those times in the Bible where people would go to God and they'd be like, what about this verse? There's the ox and the mire, there's kosher law, there's the spy, the Jericho Spy.
The Sabbath.
There's the Sabbath. There's various examples where God's like, okay, go with your conscience over the law. And this happens on every single time, right? Like every single time there's a conflict between the law and the right thing to do, like, or let's say the loving thing to do, that God is like, you do the loving thing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what you need to do. And so for me, I am going to say, I encourage you. I love it to see it because it's them flexing their individualism. If for some reason it ends up being a sin, that will punish itself. That's not my responsibility. And I'm happy that they're able to do it, right? Like, again, here's another one. I've never done a drug in my life. I've never smoked a marijuana. I've never had a drop of alcohol in my entire life. I'm not going to start now. Like, I don't like it, but I will fight for your right to do it. And if you want to celebrate, you have my blessing. If it's really a bad thing, you'll mess your life up, and hey, come on back home and let's get you fixed up. Now, I will still say something about it, and I can still say like, hey, I really love you and here's my concerns. If you're concerned about your son, there's that, right? But if your son says, hey, I'm having trouble with my identity, education, right? Fight with education and give them the, give them that kind of that competition, right? Let it be an open market. If I think it works in libertarian philosophy, there's no reason it shouldn't work with Christian morality as well. That I say, like, if I believe that Christ is the creator, and this is the challenge even in the scriptures, right? If you are doubting the Bible, because we don't have a video camera, I can't show you the life of Christ. I can't show you the creation of the universe. There wasn't somebody with a video camera there. I can't show it, right? But here's the challenge. You take the seeds that are planted, you plant them, they grow, you eat the fruit. If the fruit is good, then that's good soil, right? So this is my challenge with Christians. Take that same challenge that the gospel gives you. Treat it with homosexuals, gambling, drinking, whatever. Plant it, let it grow, taste the fruit. If the fruit is bad, get away. If it's not, then this is something to pursue. And those are going to be natural consequences. People don't like eating bad fruit. The prodigal son comes home because it's a crappy lifestyle, right? Like it's a crappy thing to do. Having an occasional drink, maybe that's good for you. Probably wouldn't be good for me. I'm kind of loose enough, right? But
I literally had one while we were talking.
Right? Yeah, probably not good for me, but yeah, for some people it helps them loosen up, right? And who am I to make a law that says this is it for everybody? This is why God doesn't like to make laws, because maybe my soil is different than yours, right? Like if I were in a homosexual relationship, it would be very bad for my soul because I would not be turned on by my partner, and that would be
I've often wondered, and like I've looked into all the different arguments against why they're like the 6 or 7 passages against homosexuality. I've looked into the alternative explanations and arguments for them, find some of them plausible, some I'm not as I don't know, satisfied with their explanations on.
Right.
But I definitely the strongest arguments for me for why homosexuality wouldn't be a sin are often more the things that you just alluded to, which is like, how often did Jesus have to correct us for observing the letter of the law, but not the heart of the law?
Yes.
I think to an extent, God gave the law, I think, I don't know if I'd use the word reluctantly, but I think God gave us the law knowing that like you're like we wouldn't even measure up to it, and I think it served a particular purpose for a time. And so there's
just to interrupt, because I want you to answer this question while you keep going. Why do you think God gave kosher law only to reject it? Because I feel like in that answer is a lot of
a lot of it was the mixture with the well, I mean, there's some of the kosher law was probably practical for that day and age, like not eating pork and stuff before being able to prepare and cook it properly and understanding germ theory and all that.
Taught him how to cook it properly, right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of I mean, there's that, but I think primarily a lot of Levitical law, a lot of Old Testament law. My view on this from my study is that a lot of it was God trying to distinguish His people from the surrounding cultures. And God was very big on not having any mixture with the pagan cultures and stuff. So a lot of that. And so this is, you might be, I don't know if you're bringing this up because I know a lot of the explanations for like, even when homosexuality was brought up, it was brought up in the context of those pagan cultures, that it wasn't a voluntary relationship between two consenting adults of the same sex. A lot of it was, pretty barbaric, nasty stuff involving children a lot of times. And, or like, Sodom and Gomorrah, like a lot of people bring that up. And I think, well, that's a stupid argument, because even if if the attempted rape hadn't been like male on male, it still would have been rape.
Right. It's rape.
Like,
That's the
I don't
problem.
think the problem was primarily the same sexness of that
I gotta tell
of
you,
that
as a
threat.
kid, I even read that verse, and I was like, "Oh yeah, rape. Rape is bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
these people suck because of
And
rape."
even more so, then what does Jesus and Paul remind us of later, which was like, what was their it's kind of like what you were talking about earlier, where it's like when those sins happen, it's because a lot of stuff happened before that that was wrong. And what was Sodom and Gomorrah's main sin? He didn't love their neighbor. They didn't care for the least of these. They were selfish. They had no concern for each other.
Yep.
And that culture led to a lot of bad fruit, like you're talking about here. And so, yeah, I definitely like. I'm not even when I say I'm going to be very careful with my words. I lean towards those conservative views, but I don't hold to them like black and white, like I'm absolutely sure, because um, I'm just not. And
Well,
I've heard like,
if I were to
yeah,
steel man your argument, you see a traditional Christian getting kicked out of the liberty movement because they have a very traditional view of marriage or something, right?
yeah,
Like, yeah, yeah, and that just goes back to my earlier point that we shouldn't be looking to kick people out. If any, that used to be my view on it, right? And if the view was to kick the Hodeys out of the movement, all of a sudden you don't have, like, as opposed to change me, you miss out on an ally, right? Like you miss out on
yeah.
somebody who's going to end up being your friend, right? Like, so I needed to have my heart worked on, and like somebody to like change it and read these verses with and explain it to me, right? Like to kind of get to where I am on the subject today. So, because you are right, like there is a lot of like gatekeeping in this sense. That's like, if you don't absolutely love that, your kid is going to be trans, and you're going to get them
But it's not
a
even,
puppet to stick down their pants when they're 3 years
and
old,
I,
so they get used to the feeling of having a penis, which is like a real thing, which is just
yeah. I mean,
bizarre.
a lot
But
of a lot of my issue with even transgenderism isn't even like I'm not even. I don't think it's sinful if a person who's an adult and has struggles with their gender expression and undergoes transition. I actually think there's less of a biblical case to condemn that than there is to condemn homosexuality,
yeah,
even if it's a voluntary relationship. And even that's not as concrete as some people think it is. I worry more about uh, the gender theory and stuff when it comes to what we're pushing on children. I guess that's what my main concern is. And then it's and at the same token though, um, I don't want to be hateful towards people, and I don't want to be like some of the Christians who um, these communities have been wounded by. And I'm very mindful and cognizant of that as well. I do recognize some of what the traditional Christian is facing when they enter the liberty movement is blowback from decades of the church being absolutely abusive towards
yep,
GSM individuals.
yep.
And that is not Christ-like at all. Because even if I were to view either of those things as being sinful, okay, well, those are one of many things that are sinful. And guess what? We're all sinners.
Yeah. The
So those
church's own
people,
actions were condemned by the Bible.
yeah,
The reason those got overturned is because somebody read the Bible and was like, "You're not living up to your Bible. Like, you say it, you're not preaching it or living it." Right?
yeah,
Like, that's the problem. I mean, as far as like the kids go, this kind of goes into the peaceful parenting thing, which is something that I do love. Which is the idea that it's like we kind of we train our kids from the beginning as though that these are voluntary interactions. We often make excuse to have involuntary interactions with our kids, to have
yeah.
violent interactions with our children, because we just say, "Oh, they need authority at this time. They need
Well, I
this
think they do
whatever."
need authority, but what does Christ-like authority look like is what I challenge Christians with, which is like a discipline and authority are good, but the
Mhm.
authority of God and of Jesus and the Holy Spirit is contrary to the warped view of authority and discipline that the world teaches. Because the world corrupts those things to be coercive and evil, whereas God's authority and God's discipline is loving and gentle.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
Right, and it works with what you have. We talk. Paul talks about going milk to meat, right? Like you
Yep.
start with milk, you give them meat. So when you're raising a kid, they don't know the difference between a steak that they can eat and a pudding cup that they can. Versus when you're 18, you have the ability to make a
Yeah.
decision between steak and pudding. Now, you probably also were able to do that at 17. 16, 15. Where's the line? There's a reason there's not a hard line for it. It's difficult to define, right? Like we don't,
Yeah.
it depends. Every kid is going to kind of manage these things differently. And therefore every parent is going to kind of have to adjust their styles a little bit. I, for one, believe that allowing a trans person, I mean, it's kind of important to get it in before puberty, because that way your hormones develop your body the way you want to. But that being said, I don't think we rush them at age 4 years old and be like, do you wish you had a penis, to your little daughter constantly? Like, you're just like, oh my gosh, like it's going to, as long as they are comfortable with telling you these things, they're going to let you know way before that age, right? Like if you force them into a closet because you have that violent parenting and they're scared of you because you're an authoritarian figure, right? You'll never know. So like what they're going to, and that's where the confusion and difficulty is going to come from. You're never going to be able to have that educational process with them or have them be comfortable with themselves as an individual if you take that away from them and you raise them to respect your authority completely until they're 18 years old. Our job, I mean, we're libertarians. We believe in
Yeah.
individualism. Shouldn't we be trying to create more individuals with our kids?
Oh yeah,
Right?
and
Yeah.
it's like ultimately, if my kid ever came out as gay or they believe they were transgender, I'm not going to try to control them because
Yeah.
that is the opposite approach. Even if I think what they're doing ultimately is not beneficial for, because it's like my primary concern is that I am not convinced always that these lifestyles are beneficial for them. But
Sure.
I also think what you said might have some merit to it, which is it might be that these are things that are uh not universal, and like for you it might be wrong, but for somebody else maybe it isn't. And there are things that scripture tells us that are matters of personal conviction, and maybe
Yep.
this is something. And the whole milk before meat thing is another good argument too, which is like maybe in the Old Testament, in that time period, this general prohibition made sense and was beneficial for the most amount of people. But as time progresses, maybe that has changed. There's a
Yep.
lot of complexity around this, but I'm glad we were able to talk about this because it helps. First of all, like conversation like this helps me to crystallize my thoughts and views better. And I like being able to have this kind of conversational back and forth and get pushed on my beliefs so that I can consider alternative points of view and just gives me more to think about and hopefully more to grow on. And I don't like whether this is Christians or libertarians. Sometimes people I think get to a point where they're like, oh, I got it all figured out. I don't need to learn anymore. All my views are correct. It's like, man, like I could never be
Yeah.
that prideful or arrogant because like I know how much I've been wrong in the past. I'm sure there's still stuff I'm wrong about right now. Can't know what it is till I get to that point, but that has to happen organically over time. And I feel like this is all like our whole conversation has we've hit different topics, but I think the theme of it is um ultimately what wins the day. And I always agree with you when you say this is leading with love. And, uh, I think Paul said it best when he was like, I could have all the gifts of prophecy and speaking in tongues, and I could write the greatest poetry and novels, and I could do the greatest deeds. But if I do it all and I don't have love, I'm but a noisy gong. And I think that's at the end of the day, uh, if we're not motivated primarily by our love for God and our neighbor, then Christians and as libertarians, we're going to fall short of the mark. And that does need to be what our hearts are oriented towards.
Yeah, man, dude. Thanks for having me on. Obviously,
Yeah.
pleasure to talk with you as always. I mean, obviously, you're part of the show sometimes too, so you understand. I mean,
Yeah,
I
before I wanted to give you a chance before we got off here just to plug your stuff again and talk about Enemy of My Enemy, which is a show that if you guys, watching this follow me, definitely go watch that show. Sometimes I'm a guest host on it, but maybe just quickly explain Enemy of My Enemy before we sign off.
Yeah, Enemy of My Enemy is a podcast, the We're Libertarians Network. We go weekly, unless somebody gets really sick because they had an adverse reaction to an immunity shot, unfortunately, a
Or
vaccine.
they're in jail for stealing an apple.
Or they're in jail for stealing, or dead for
That's an
stealing
inside
an
joke,
apple. Poor
folks.
Brian. Yeah. I mean, and it's conversations like this that spawn from it that I actively seek left, right, and center libertarians to talk about a singular issue. Now, there's sometimes that we all agree, right? But there are sometimes that we disagree. And I think it's important for people to hear and validate these other perspectives, even if they take a different point of view. Because like you, I think that, light kills dark, right? Like
Yep.
dark does not kill light. Like I could invite as much darkness on my show as I wanted, but if the light is there, darkness isn't going to stand a chance, right? Like now this isn't, we don't we mostly don't talk about religion. We stick to politics. But that's kind of my view on like how the truth and how philosophy and everything works, is that if I have an inferior opinion, that's going to get chased away. Now, we've done over 20 episodes now, and I have changed my opinion on some of the things that we've already done. Now, this isn't just because it's like I was an evil person or dark. It's just, that's the great part of having conversations with people that see things differently, is you get these perspectives and you say, thank you for that perspective. I would like to embrace that. Like that's a new part of me. I mean, this is a good point to wrap up on, because you talk about that accelerated, like I'm an accelerated learning process right now. I'm a way better libertarian than I was when I joined. Boy, I guess it must have been 6-ish, 7, 8. I don't know, maybe even longer than that, years ago now that I'm thinking. Yeah, well, Obama was around, whatever. Anyway, however long I've been a libertarian for, I've become a better libertarian since then, and it's going at an increasing learning rate, and it's because I'm able to have these dialogues, and because I've kind of created a culture, and it's not, it sounds arrogant to say I've created, but I have chosen the people that I do well with that help create this kind of loving culture. That if I invited somebody to hang out with us, they'd be welcomed to have their ideas, to have a back and forth, and then to be like, you know what, if we still agree to disagree, that's what's up. It just happens that way. But at least we're able to have these conversations. We're mostly Sunday nights. You can go live, you can comment, we take audience questions. It's accelerating. I mean, we got 20 times the listeners that we had like a month ago, and then like 10 times the listeners that we had the month before that. It's one of those that's like, I have like 5 downloads on my first episode. Now, when you start to hit the thousands, you're kind of like, oh geez, like this is getting to be really something. And it's cool, because I think there is a hunger for these conversations without anger, without violence,
Yeah.
without resentment, and I get the passion. I get why people are passionate about it. When you have one of your friends that's been molested on a border prison, or if you've had somebody who's had an adverse reaction to the vaccine, your point of view is important to consider. And so you're going to have a naturally differing opinion with somebody who says, maybe there does need to be borders. And I think the combination of these two ideas, because I think libertarian as an individualist philosophy, it's not something that we collectivize. So it's not okay for me to say it's not okay for me to put forth a philosophy or an idea or a policy that works 99% of the time. It either works 100% of the time, or I say it's your call over your own life. Right? Because that's the two, right? And so what I like about these conversations is, even if they end in a place where we don't agree, that's all the more reason for us to say like, maybe that's why personal accountability is so important. Maybe that's why personal decisions are more important than state decisions, because there's no amount of policy that's going to navigate these complex issues. We can talk a lot about one issue every week. We usually deal with some kind of current event if there's something going on, or a big topic that everybody's dealing with, and try to navigate that. But yeah, that's kind of the show. You can catch me there. I also write, I mean, my main shtick, and I love my podcasting, but I am a much better writer, and I do write about video games a lot. If you search for Hodey Johns anywhere on Google, I'm sure you're going to find one of my many great video game guides around, and that is certainly a way to interact with me as well. That's been awesome. That's really taken off. I actually just got a promotion there as well, and there's a lot of balls I'm balancing right now, but
we're gonna have to at one point in the future do a video game stream where we're both like multiplaying, like do like a hour stream of us playing some kind of multiplayer game together.
Sure,
that'd be fun.
Yeah, any excuse to play video games, I will take.
Right, yeah. I don't get to play them anymore, but now it's like, see, I do podcasts. I tell my wife I'm going down to podcast.
Right. Oh yeah. So we'll podcast, yeah, and just forget to record it, and then
right.
Just level up a few times in Destiny or Diablo or something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right,
well, Hodey, it was a pleasure having you on. I always enjoy our conversations, and yeah, everyone give him a follow. Enemy of My Enemy. Definitely a great show to check out. Other than that, love you all. Thanks for watching and tuning in, and peace. Have a good night.